Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the July and today's meeting of the Children and Families Scrutiny Board. You'll pick up already, my voice is starting to go. I'm hoping it's going to last for the next sort of 2.5 hours or whatever length of time it's going to take. Thank you all very much for coming. My name's Billy Flynn. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm chair of the Scrutiny Board. And just bear in mind that the meeting is being webcast on the council sort of website. So everything we do and say here will be observed remotely. And a very warm welcome indeed to anyone who is watching online today. We'll start as usual by introductions, and I'll start on the left-hand side.
Good morning, Craig Timmins, Councillor for the Calverley and Farsley ward.
Good morning, Andrew Scapes, Councillor for Beeston and Holbeck.
Good morning, Laura Jane Fisher, Councillor for Moortown.
Good morning, Nick Tones, School Staff Representative.
Tony Britton, representing Roman Catholic Diocese of Leeds.
Morning, Helen Bellamy, School Staff Representative.
Good morning, Councillor Jules Heselwood, representing Weetwood ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Oliver Edwards, representing Guiseley and Rawdon.
Good morning, Councillor Helen Hayden, Executive Member for Children and Families.
Good morning, everybody. Pete Thorpe, Interim Director of Children and Families.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ian Bennett. I'm the Director of Nursing and Quality for the West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board for Leeds Place.
Good morning, everyone. Anthony Douglas, the Independent Chair of the Leeds SEND and Alternative Provision Improvement Board.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dave Clark. I'm the Head of Learning Improvement.
Good morning. I'm Katie North, Head of School Improvement.
Good morning, Sinead Skull, Third Sector Rep for Young Lives Leeds.
Good morning. This is Anna Skato. I'm parent representative.
I'm Maria Adams. I'm Leeds Parent Carer Forum.
Good morning. Tim Goodall, Councillor for Headingley and Hyde Park.
Good morning, everybody. It's Councillor Rob Chesterfield here representing the Middleton Park ward.
Good morning. Ryan Stevenson, Councillor for Harewood ward.
Morning, everyone. I'm Rob Clayton and I'm the Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Thank you all very much indeed. Just before we start, I'd just like to extend a very warm welcome to our new member this morning, Councillor Fisher, and some of our guests at the bottom end of the table. Seems like a million miles away, but we can see you and hear you very well. Hi. Councillor Flint will be arriving later on for one of the items, and she'll introduce herself when she does arrive, of course. Warm welcome to Amber Burton, Ian Bennett, Anthony Douglas, and Russell Trudgeon was supposed to be here from Sacre but has sent his apologies. So it really is good to see you all here today, and I'll be very interested to hear what you've got to say when we come to your item later on in the meeting. Rob, would you like to kick off the first five?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just the usual procedural items that we consider. Item 1 is appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents, and there are no such appeals today, Chair. Oh, my word. That's my phone. It's sorry about that. That's Siri being rather unhelpful. Item 2 is items that exclude the press or the public, and there are no such items on today's agenda. Item 3 is late items of business, and there are no late items today, Chair. Item 4 is declarations of interest, and I will just briefly pause to allow any elected members to declare any undeleted to Council's Code of Conduct. Councillor Fisher.
Yes, thank you. I work for the NASUWT, the Teachers' Union, as an organiser.
Thank you, and I will note that under the minutes under this item. Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Item 5, Chair, is apologies, and we have
Sorry, people already know that I work part-time for the NEU, but as Councillor Fisher is declaring that, I better declare as well. But people already know I work part-time anyway, so that's fine.
Yes, one of the issues will be whether it's on your register of interest. So if it's on there, then it's already in the public domain. But I will note both under the minutes. Yeah. And then, yes, Chair, apologies. We have apologies from a Councillor Senior and also from Kate Blacker, one of our co-opted members. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed, Rob. Just glad it wasn't my phone that went off. Have done it before. Just before we start the meeting proper, to help the ancient guy at the top of the table here, it would be very helpful if you bring in your microphones as close to your, well, when you're speaking basically to where you're actually. Some of you are very clear, some of you aren't so clear. It would be very helpful indeed if you could bring the mics as close to you as possible. Okay, moving on to the substantive items. Item number 6 is the minutes of the last meeting. They start on page 7 of the agenda pack that you've got, and I'll go through each of the pages as per normal. Any comments on page 7 and 8? 9 and 10? 11 and 12? 13 and 14? 15 and 16? And 17. Okay. Are there any matters arising, Rob, from the minutes last time?
Yes, Chair, just a couple of items. Minute 9, which was the performance report, we discussed the EHCP processing times, and there was a request for some additional data on that and with annual reviews. Just to know, I know that hasn't been circulated yet, but it is in progress and will be shared as soon as possible with the board. And then minute 11, which is the sources of work discussion at our last meeting, the 10th of June. Just to note that the discussion and the suggestions that were brought forward by board members have been included under Appendix 1 at item 10 under the work programme, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rob. Could we have proposed to accept the minutes as an accurate record? Sorry.
Sorry, just a matter arising on page 16. We've got a post 16 send transport. I appreciate we're discussing it in October. I just want to say I'm glad to see the form for parents has finally been released on the 29th of June. But I gather parents have been told, or parents and carers have been told, there won't be interim transport arrangements if they need to appeal. This is of great concern to parents and carers, particularly with the number of cases where people eventually won their case after the appeal last year. And I hope, I don't know whether people have got an answer now, but I hope that will be taken into consideration and something is put in place for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Would anyone like to comment on that from the officer end of the table?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Last year there were interim transport arrangements for those appeals that were delayed and were being heard after September term started. It's our intention that all appeals will be heard before September, and therefore there won't be the need for interim arrangements from September onwards. Obviously, we will keep everything under review as the year progresses. Thank you.
Councillor Goodall, you want to come back? Okay. Are there any other items that anyone would like to raise? Okay, again, and thank you for raising that, Councillor Goodall. Very good one. Thank you. Would anyone like to propose that they are an accurate record of the minutes from the last meeting? Thank you, Miss. Second? Councillor Edwards. All in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Carried unanimously. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Moving on to item 7 of the agenda, Children and Families Senior Management and Leadership Capacity Update. Peter, are you going to lead on this one?
I will, Chair. Thank you very much. Okay, and thank you for allowing this to be provided as a presentation, which hopefully is going to be on screen. Excellent. Thank you, Rob. So I've been with you now for 5 months, and what I want to talk you through, if we could just move to the next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so as the slides...
Just bear with me, Pete. It's showing on my screen but isn't going through, so just hang on a moment.
It's okay. It's always the IT in the classroom, isn't it? So you just keep talking. Except
we could always get a kid in the classroom, can't it?
So what I'm going to cover is the leadership is always set within a context. So the request from the chair has been to talk about the senior leadership and management capacity. I am going to restrict this to heads of service and above, rather than getting down into the minutiae of where there are inevitably other challenges within leadership and management at lower levels, but you've asked this particularly. So I'm going to cover some of the context of system-wide change and reforms, how we have strengthening governance within children and families, because leadership and governance clearly go hand in hand, the new shape and design of children and families as a directorate, to answer the straight question of, so where are we at today, where are the gaps, and then to cover what does that mean in terms of transitional arrangements whilst we work our way towards a fully substantive service. So if we just move on to the next one, please, Rob. I think the important thing to recognise is that in terms of the parliamentary cycle, we are at the point now where many plans have been laid, legislation is forthcoming, and white papers have been put through. And there's a huge pressure now coming from the centre to make sure that reforms are being implemented at pace of next March. And if I was to describe the approach to the reforms, it is everything everywhere all at once. So it does feel that across all the areas affecting children and families, there is a reform somewhere. So to make sense of this, we've bundled them into three significant areas of transformation. So the first line that you've got there on family help and early support, what we're aiming for there is to have a coherent offer for children and families, and to gather the reforms together. There's Best Start in Life, there's the Family First partnership reforms, which is the overhaul of the safeguarding system and how that changes. There's Neighbourhood Health for Children, which is obviously led by the ICB, and there is also work around youth hubs and youth strategy. So we've gathered those together so that we don't have separate strands of work, but we we aim towards the coherence of the offer for children. Early days, and we're not where we would wish to be for that, because there's more work to do, but that's part of the process. Send and alternative provision improvement and reform you're going to have plenty of later on the agenda, but to reassure you that is central to not just improvement, but also to reform. And then, as we've discussed many times here, transformation around how we manage the population of need for children who are progressing through the safeguarding system and who will require our help and protection by being brought into the care of the local of the council. All of those are very significant, chunky pieces of work. Where we've been looking at the first point is to ask the question of, is there sufficient partnership governance to take those forward as a whole system for children? And again, you'll hear more about the partnership governance for SEND later. Family help and early support governance is just emerging. We've got the first meeting next week of that new partnership. That needs to very quickly get to an edgy performance. And stable and sustainable care is overseen through the corporate parenting board, and there's an ongoing conversation with Councillor Hayden about how that may move in the future. So just moving on then, so that's the context for the leadership. At the essence of this, and this is, I think, a realisation by central government that we cannot carry on expecting to meet the population of need in the way that we have done previously. All of the reforms are founded on inclusion and belonging, and essentially, and this is easy to say and hard to deliver, we want the experience for children in Leeds is we want children to be in their families and to be working ever harder, understanding family networks around what support can be brought to bear for children to stay in their families, children to be sustained within their communities and to be connected in their communities, regardless of any additional needs or risks that they have, and for children to be in their local schools, and increasingly for children to be in their local mainstream education. And again, you'll hear more about that when we talk about the outcome of the inspection. To give you a sense of my leadership priorities during these past few months, on the next slide, please, Rob. It has been a case of hitting the ground running, being clear about the culture that is prevailing within the in the Directorate. Many strengths to build on, but also areas where we have been discussing what may need to be different if we go to either to move forward. I'll talk a bit about that. Particularly, sorry, Rob, if we could move the slide on, please. Particularly looking at the oversight and the capacity that we need for financial management within the Directorate. We now have a monthly finance assurance board with colleagues from finance, funnily enough, which is about making sure we don't end up in the same position at year end with the very substantial overspend in children's, which was 32 million last year. We do understand that is not something which can be repeated. There's a People and Culture Board which meets every 2 months, which is about the organisational health and the experience our staff have, but also workforce planning for the future. Again, early days, very strongly supported by HR, and the reintroduction of a more robust performance governance oversight, which you would expect to be able to answer the question of how are we going to spot the slow, gentle decline and where are we going to turn around our biggest risks. The stronger partnership of governance I've spoken about, and there's also been the need to think about renewal of relationships. So we are particularly acutely aware of some areas of disconnect between ourselves and particularly the education estate, and thinking about how that needs to develop. Critical relationships like the Parent Carer Forum we've had here today, but also understanding the relationship that children and families has within the whole council. So I would expect to have children at the heart of this council, and therefore children have to be stepping into that space corporately as well. Probably fair to say, Chair, there's been a few conversations around political group relationships as well. So that's again sort of furthering the context, getting on to the a bit more detail, and then I'll get into the structure. The first thing I did when I came here was to have a listening exercise. If you really want to know how an organisation is performing, talk to your middle leaders. They will tell you. They were very forthright. We took those conversations and distilled down 6 areas that we need to move on in terms of the cultural shift within children and families. The first one is keeping the best of who we are, and Leeds has got some really special qualities, particularly around relational practice and particularly around child-friendly and being child-centred. However, there were also 5 areas which need to be fundamentally different. Moving as one sounds a bit of an obscure term. Leeds has been set up for children and families to have a social care arm and a learning arm, and that was the language which was used. 2 arms. None of the reforms that I set out, none of the leadership context can be delivered by social care and learning being in isolation. They have to be fully integrated, as well as fully integrated with our partners in health and with the police particularly. So that's the first direction. Because we've had a lot of leadership churn, and I think you'll understand this, particularly in the last year, there has been a sense that every time there's a new leader, the direction changes. And that's why we've started with governance. So just as in a school, you would have governance to give you ballast to your direction and your culture over time. So we need that ballast here, so that as partnerships, we know that once we've laid our plans, those are the plans, and the direction won't change when the next person comes in. People are working extremely hard. There are some operational teams which are under particular stress, and I must say frontline staff are working their socks off, and with that comes the need to ensure that we've got the well-being offer right for our staff. Delegations had slipped. Too much was being decided from the top of the organisation, so there is a process we're going through about resetting delegations and building confidence in ownership, particularly amongst heads of service and service managers. I'm looking to David because he's in the room. And with that ownership goes the accountability. So we need to reclaim distributed leadership and embrace the high support, high challenge, but also the trust and check way of working. And then the last part around unlocking delivery, a sense of we have a lot of conversation, but getting to action has sometimes been too slow. And sometimes there have been some constraints, some of our own making and some of them not, which have slowed down change. So that's our commitment as the senior leadership, heads of service and chief officers for this year of areas of focus. So getting into the actual structure, this is quite a busy slide. To break the social care arm, learning arm, we have deleted the 2 deputy director posts. So that wasn't a decision taken in isolation. Conversations with obviously Councillor Hayden as the lead member, other political soundings, talking to particularly the steering groups of the primary, secondary and special schools to sound out, does this feel the right direction? Hand on heart, universal support for the direction. Also within the organisation, because the council has committed through the spans and layers work to reducing the number of layers of management that we have. And this now makes children and families compliant with the top arrangements for the number of tiers. Regardless of that requirement, I would have done it anyway, because I think this is the right structure to have that integrated approach. So there are 5 substantive chief officer roles. The chief officer for education is substantively in post in Rebecca McCormack, who you know. The chief officer for corporate parenting and reunification is Ben Finley, who you know. The other 3 posts are substantively vacant. So we have some covering arrangements, which I'll talk about in a while. In fact, tomorrow, this Thursday, tomorrow we have the employment committee for the chief officer for SEND and inclusion, obviously a critical post for where we are. And on Friday we have the chief officer post for family help and social work. Later in the month we have the employment committee for the chief officer commissioning and governance. So there is a version of the world, Chair, where at the end of this month we have at least made offers for those 3 vacancies. Critical roles. The roles have been designed to not be islands, so they are genuinely interdependent, and the interdependencies have been built into the job descriptions to force some of that working together. So that's that moving as one. And I think this gives us a far more stable platform, not just for the business as usual, which is in children's is a never-ending piece of work, always on top of the population of needs, but also for implementing the reforms. The challenge for us will be getting this structure into post whilst managing the pace of reforms, and there are challenges within that. And as you would expect, these roles as system leadership roles, so not only looking inward into the services, but looking out into the partnership, these will be closely connected into the partnership governance. Okay, we're nearly there, you'd be pleased to know, Chair. So next one, please, Rob. Okay, so the reality of today, so anything in yellow are where the recruitment is in progress. So I've talked about the chief officers across the top, which we have out, which are in progress. The head of commissioning, market management and customer service, we have made an offer to, so that again is in process, not in a position yet to announce who that is. The head of social care reform went through a process last week, and again that has been offered and accepted. So we now have our head of social care reform, and that role will be working closely with equivalent roles within health and also within the police, where the police is already in place. So everything that you see on there is already moving forward. There are some roles which through the council's consolidation may end up in a different part of the organisation. Those are highlighted in purple, and are the head of performance management and improvement and the programme and partnership management. So That's not definite, but those are conversations which are happening with pending the outcome of that. When I came into post, there were a number of additional acting roles across this heads of service structure. We only have one acting role now, which is the head of service for children's social work and family help in the West. So that's the West area team, being very ably managed, I must say. At the point where the chief officer for family help and social work is appointed and in post, that will allow us to then review that, and I would expect that to go back to a substantive appointment. So everything is moving in the right direction in terms of the stability of the team. So given that, next slide please, Rob. Given that the substantive team, most people will have 3 months notice, so there won't be a full team in place until November, and that's on the assumption that 3 appointments are made. These are the interim arrangements. So obviously, Chief Officer Education is substantively in post. Phil Evans has retired and returned and continues to give us 0.6 full-time equivalent in the Chief Officer Commissioning and Governance. That's the role he is assigned to. Phil is providing also additional input into the oversight of SEND and inclusion. Chief Officer Family Help and Social Work, Jade Lamb, continues to act up into that, and we're very grateful to Jade for the leadership she's bringing to that role. Again, not just looking into the service, but looking across into the whole family help reforms. Chief Officer SEND and Inclusion, we have had 2 interims in that role, both of whom have moved on to other things. The market for interims is very challenging for SEND, but we are very delighted to have Amber with us as a SEND consultant to give us focus for the reforms and for the improvement planning. So it's not providing the whole chief officer role. It's a very focused piece of work to make sure that we are on track and on time for some very challenging timescales, and importantly, to have the capacity to do the networking out and into the system. And Amber's been working very closely with health and education colleagues. Corporate parenting, Ben in that role continues to provide a broader oversight of social care functions and provides the deputising capacity. And the reason that Ben is providing the deputising capacity is that in the future structure, all of the chief officer roles will be deputising, and I know that's been something which has been discussed at this committee before, but until the constitutional change is made, then the designated deputy director for social care has to be the deputy director for the DCS. So there's some means a bit of constitutional housekeeping, but we are very sensitive to making sure there is a deputy director in post at all times. And then there are some line management changes which will need to be made further down the line, but we're not making just yet to create the structure that I showed you on the previous slide. So the outlook, final slide, please, Rob. So the outlook is, if successful, full senior team in place for November 2026. That does mean you've had a year of disruption. It has been challenging, but people have worked really hard to create stability and maintain grip in that space. We will then take care of the last of the acting arrangements of heads of service to a substantive arrangement. And then, as I've said, constitutionally, we'll be in a stronger place for deputisation. So thank you, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much indeed, Pete. I think that's a very honest appraisal of where we are at the moment. And I don't think anyone on the board underestimates the leadership had and that the directors had over the last sort of 12 months or so. And thanks very much indeed for the proposed new structure. Interesting sort of point you made about when new leaders come in and there's a change of direction, all the rest of it. In the military, it was a sort of follow the last order, which tended to forget everything that had gone before. Not very helpful. So I think that was an excellent presentation, and thank you very much indeed. Would there any comments or questions from the board? Councillor Scopes.
Thank you, Chair, and also thank you, Peter, for coming and sharing that presentation. I also thought it was a helpful presentation. I've got two comments and 3 questions, if that's all right, Chair. So the 2 comments, the first one is, I note your comment about not addressing the middle leadership capacity, but I welcome the Chair's suggestion that comes in September. So I won't ask questions on that, but I just put that as a comment. The second comment I have is the point that you made at the end. I was going to ask questions about the duration of the vacancies, but I thought it's helpful for you to set that out straight away and up front. Clearly, it's been a challenging time for the Directorate, and I know the individuals in the Directorate work really hard, including yourself, and so having stability in the leadership will benefit the team, but also what we're trying to do is benefit children here in Leeds. And I also welcome what you said about a lot of the positive stuff around child-friendly Leeds, and there's lots of work around place efficiency, which is also very good. I guess my questions are, I guess our job as Scrutiny is to challenge and try and get you to be better rather than to pat you on the back for what you're doing well. But I preface these with that. So firstly, on slide 4, you talk about in schools, so children should be in their local schools. And I guess this is a real challenge for a number of schools. So I'm a governor at 2 different schools, and I know schools are struggling to cope with children with profound needs. And I also know, and as an example, one of the schools where I'm a governor has asked for support, capital support, to provide space for children that need additional support, and that's been declined. And I guess the challenge there is, if we're going to deliver these 3 things in the children to be in their families, in their communities, in their schools, schools need capital support to make that possible. The second question around on slide 5, and I sort of I note that you've got this sort of two sides of the challenge. So you want to manage the finance and you want to manage delivery, and I guess my thought is that sometimes those can be at odds with each other. So the question is it possible to deliver on both, or have you got a priority? Which one has to happen? And if it's delivery, do we need to have a conversation around the budget? And I don't think necessarily Scrutiny is the place to decide what the budget is. I think that's clearly a council as a whole position. But my personal view is it'd be good to know what additional budget, if any, you need, so we can then have a political conversation outside of here around how we fund that, or if we fund it. My third question is more general, and I guess in a later paper we talk about how we've talked about improvements in the SEND area, specifically 12 times in the last 2 years, and we welcome the repeated visits. But at each of those meetings we have had assurances that things will get better, and it's been a really difficult time for the Directorate and additional people coming into the system, and so I'm not belittling that at all, but I guess the question there is, how can we be sure that this is different? So in November, when we've got our new team up and running, how can we be assured that this time things will start getting better from November 2026? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Scopes. Pete, would you like to take those? I think the third question, if we can delay that one until maybe the SEND item later in the doings, Peter.
Okay, so if I'll delay that, and thank you, Councillor Flynn, for sort of bracing me before you asked your questions. That's appreciated. So picking up on the children in their local schools and increasingly mainstream, that is the direction of travel. In fact, these 2 questions are interlinked, actually. At the essence, there are 176,000 children in Leeds, and most children will go through their lives without touching statutory services. Most children will attend their local schools, and they'll grow up and have that experience. All of the reforms, when I say they're founded on inclusion and belonging, is a recognition that by escalating need, we cannot financially afford it. The country cannot afford it, and so everything is predicated on identifying and meeting need early. Now, I'll be careful how I phrase this, because there will always be some children who will need a specialist service. There will always be children who need our protection and care. There will always be children with profound disabilities, and every child deserves to have that entitlement to growing up with the best of experience that they can within that. But the direction of travel for schools is increasingly mainstream, and we recognise, and I think it's recognised in the reforms, that this is not a straightforward path to take. So work that we've been doing around inclusive mainstream practice, for example, is supporting schools to develop their capacity. The planning for the reforms around experts at hand, which we'll probably hear more about later, is about wrapping support around schools to help them build their capacity. The caveat on that is it's a 3-year funding programme in essence. What I would liken it to is, back in the day when I was in the classroom, for children for whom English was an additional language, a team came in from the authority and did something with those children. Now you wouldn't dream of that, because schools have built their own capacity and they have that expertise. But that didn't happen overnight. So there is a journey that goes on around schools' capacity to be able to manage and work and support children with more needs to achieve. You used the phrase profound needs. Children with profound needs would not be in a mainstream setting. So there are obviously limitations, and that's where our silks and to a lesser degree resource bases, but the silks would be stepping in. But what we need is every child who can be in a mainstream setting to be thriving in a mainstream setting, and the children who need to be in the silks, the right children who are in that provision. Your point about the capital is important. Obviously the capital is an enabler, but the capital has to be very tightly linked to a sufficiency strategy. And there is more work to do to be absolutely assured that our projections on sufficiency tell us where we're going to have the needs, so that children can have those needs met closest to home. Because what we don't want is children unnecessarily having to travel long distances for their education, if that can be avoided. So the capital goes hand in hand with sufficiency, and I think we just have to be careful that we don't disconnect capital investment from sufficiency needs. Your next question, which was around can you balance the books and deliver? And again, it's around how you manage that population of need. There will always be children who need our protection and our help and protection. If a child has to come into care, they will be coming into care if that's what's required. And we understand the costs which happen with that. A better outcome all round is for children to be sustained in their families where it's safe to do so, and to be in that more preventative space. £10 million buys you surprisingly little for specialist placements. £10 million at prevention with family help can buy you an awful lot. And so some of the challenge we have is using the reforms to start to turn the tide of slowing down the rate at which children are moving through statutory processes and into care. So it's not that it's impossible, but there will always be a tension in balancing the books. In terms of financial investment, where our SEND system is at today cannot transform without very significant investment, which will be from the council and from our colleagues in the ICB in terms of their work with providers. But I won't speak for Ian, he's here, he can speak for himself on that. But that is without doubt where we're at. I was at Resources Scrutiny on Monday, so I'm having a scrutinised week, and there were some searching questions on the same issues. I'll give you the same answer I gave there. I have an inherited budget. Councils work on incremental budgeting, and because it's incremental budgeting, things get baked in over time, which need examination. So things, for example, like vacancy factors get baked in. I'm running a vacancy factor of 11%, which means I'm working on the assumption that 1 in 9 posts will not be filled at any time. That is not the way to run a budget, because it's driving work for additional costs in areas such as overtime and agency costs. So right-sizing the organisation is part of financial management. I have got some income targets which are optimistic to the point of heroic, so I need to address those. I've got some areas where we could be making more income, where we are providing a really good quality of we're providing a top quartile service, but we're charging median costs. So those are things which have to be looked at. So I think to answer the question, we have to do the balance on the delivery, but we also have to be absolutely robust on how we are taking care of every single pound that we have, both as a directorate, the impact that has corporately, and the way we work with our partners. And it's a more complicated question than can you deliver with the finances. I think we need to do all of those things to get you to a robust place.
Councillor Hayden.
Thank you. Just to add to Pete's excellent comprehensive answer, when we talk about children going to their local schools, they won't necessarily go to a certain school locally. We can't have every school meeting all needs. So in an area, and we're very lucky to have the architecture of our clusters in Leeds, which other areas do not have. So our way of thinking is that children will hopefully, except with the most complex needs, go to a local school. But one school, such as Cookridge, as we took the Exec Board paper last month, will specialise in speech and language. And another school will specialise in autism, for example. I'm pulling it out the top of my head, probably because my son is autistic. And then you may have a school which has a resource base for children with more complex needs. So we'll look at the area as a whole. The problem with providing capital spend for a certain child in a certain school is that child will move out of that school, and therefore we have to plan sufficiency, and therefore the capital spend upon the needs of the population in that local area, and divvy it up, as it were, so that we get the most efficient use of space, of money, of expertise in a local area.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Glad you raised that point, because the cluster that I'm a member of are constantly complaining about the amount of money that's being reduced year on year, and we all know the reasons why, etc. But you've emphasised the importance of centralising certain services in certain areas, and you're absolutely right. The speech and language one in Cookridge is a very good idea and a very good example, which is right on the border of my ward. But I do think we have to be very careful that we don't underfund the clusters, having set them up and having been very successful. I make no further point on that, because I know the difficulties that you sort of face.
Yeah, if I could just come back, I'm really passionate about the clusters. We have a really high functioning one in Temple Newsome, but it's a shadow of its former self when I became a councillor 11 years ago. So, but we've got that architecture, that's why I mentioned the architecture, and now we've got the funding streams and the reforms and changes that we need to really build the clusters up again and make really good use of them. Thank you.
Okay, point well made. Councillor Scott, would you like to come back? Okay. Maria.
Hi. I just want to mention all the new chief officers, and it feels like families are not going to be passed from pillar to post anymore. I mean, obviously that will take some time bedding in, but that's what we're seeing now. We'll go to a panel, it's not that panel, you have to go to another panel, it's not that panel. So will all these working together sort of eliminate the passing from pillar to post for families?
So
Pete, yeah.
I would like to think that's the ambition. There will always be panels and control points on spend and decision making about how we meet needs. So there will continue to be panels. That's a natural part of how business happens. The integration is around ensuring that the decisions we make through commissioning, the decisions we make in terms of social care, are ever more aligned. And I think when we get to children with more complex needs, particularly around children who are in care, children who are jointly in care with the local authority, complex education, health and care plans, you need to feel that the organisation is pulling in the same direction. So if I was looking at this in terms of a transformation, this is a very sort of serious long-term piece of work. This is not something that happens in a few months. This is the next 18 to 3 years worth of work to take that structure and to really embed deeply that behaviours that you're talking about, Maria. So I share your ambition, is what I'd say on that.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, welcome the presentation. I think it is interesting how we've argued for quite a long time. When you have a fresh pair of eyes, as it were, or somebody external coming in, you have a different approach to observing, I'm going to say the weaknesses, but some of the sort of existing cultural faults, and it's good to see that some of those are being addressed. I guess the real question is sort of vague, going into operational matters, but one of the issues previously has been that people working in silos. So what assurances could the Director give us in terms of ensuring that the difficult to deal with issues aren't passed around the various silos, and what's going to be the style of leadership from you, Pete, to make sure that people that are tasked with jobs in these new roles are going to be held in check, and how does that come back to us as elected members?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Stevenson. So I'm kind of looking to Dave here, because he's one of the heads of service that you're talking about, who might have been in a silo. I don't know. That listening exercise at the beginning did talk about people wanting more connection across the Directorate, particularly at the heads of service, chief officer level. We've now had I can't think how many we've had, Dave. We've had some sessions where heads of service have been brought together, and that feedback we've been discussing. This is where we're at. So I think in terms of enabling the open conversation around, let's have the truth of where we are, and then let's distill that down to, so what do we need to be doing? And I think so that output you've seen, those meetings will continue. We've scheduled it in so that as the heads of service group and myself and chief officers are coming together around that cultural direction that we are discussing. And then to the layer below, to the service managers, again, now timetabled in sessions where we're coming to work through that collective direction. In terms of leadership style, the opportunity, because this is no criticism of what's gone before, it's about where we're at now. The opportunity is to develop ownership. I think we've got some brilliant people. I genuinely do. I've met some outstanding service managers, and we need to empower those, and we need to give them the tools to do the job and the permissions. And so in that distributed leadership, you have very clear accountability. I expect to see senior responsible officers identified and people to take and own that accountability, but with the support wrapped around them, so that they're not, so they're set up for success. With that does come the internal rigour that I talked about in the way in which we look across finance, people and culture, and performance. So, for example, later this month we have the first of the quarterly performance reviews. There are 5 areas. I know you're going to ask me what they are. There are 5 areas which I've identified as areas of performance which I need to see improve. and the heads of service are working with their data analysts to develop the actions and plans for those, so that when we come together, we can look at what the value added is across that. So I'll give you an example. I will always be worried about children who are at risk of exploitation. That is not a social care job. It is a social care with education, with health, with communities, with the third sector, with schools. And so the robustness of the oversight allows us to challenge, have we turned over everything we can to turn the curve where we have got risks that we are concerned about. Does that give you some sense of the culture? So it is that high challenge, high support. It is trust and check, and it is about creating the delegations and the ownership to have genuinely distributed leadership and unlock that potential that we have.
Right. Okay. Interesting point on silos, Pete. I think most organisations will suffer from at one stage or another. I think politicians could do with looking at themselves. I think we're in the biggest silo of all. Moving on, Helen.
Yeah, I think I'll put my question forward in SEND, but just on something that you just mentioned, children at risk of exploitation. So it is a bit of a side, but I just wanted to make you aware. You will know, Councillor Helen Hayden was there this week. The misogyny in schools and the organisations that can provide work on healthy relationships right at the very lowest level in primary schools now that could really reduce the number of those children. As I say, it was a kind of side, but that was a fantastic morning.
Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Helen. It was fantastic, and huge thanks to Helen Lord and Sarah Montans-Jones, but Helen pulled together an incredible morning of looking at all those issues but giving schools really practical tools. Why I wanted to come to mention is that wandering around my summer fair in my local area on Saturday, I bumped into social workers who are working in that exploitation space, who were also there on Thursday morning. So I just wanted to make the note that actually I didn't realise that, but it wasn't just schools that were there. There were our own staff both working in exploitation and safeguarding and social work, but various different roles around children. So, which was really, really heartening to, because that goes back to the point about silos. Although that morning was aimed at schools, the audience very much reflected that working together to tackle this issue together as a city.
Helen? Very much. Shanaz?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few points and a couple of questions from me. So in terms of the clear on culture, I know Councillor Stevenson's kind of spoken it a little bit, but I just wanted to hear a little bit more about being open to prevailing culture around increasing staff well-being. I think it's really important with the kind of work that the team are dealing with, and how sometimes it can be really challenging, and how we're working across being trauma-informed and what the plans are around the wellbeing offer for staff, around the high support and the check and challenge part of it. And then also, I don't think we've mentioned anything about housing. So we want to... Sorry, housing. So a lot of young people, we want to keep young people at home with families. We've got so many overcrowded homes, and we're talking about working in partnership with different directorates and third sector and different organisations. In addition to schools, there's a lot of housing providers, housing associations, and there's something about generous leadership as well, with the director having so many skills, supporting housing providers to become registered providers, for example, and sharing their skills and knowledge, and making resources more accessible for third sector. And I was also wanting to ask about, so we spoke about balancing the finances, and there's a lot of expenses around agency costs. Is there an opportunity for third sector to come in there and kind of pick up some of the work and support there with their skill sets and the relationships that we have on the ground. Just thinking about how we can strengthen that relationship and what the appetite is there as well. Thank you.
Peter?
Okay, so I'll pick up that last point about third sector. I've always worked really well with the third sector and valued the third sector, and I've obviously had some conversation with Voluntary Action Leeds and PIP and the group there. So we've made some contact, we've started some conversation, made sure that third sector is represented on our the family partnership board, which will oversee that group of reforms I talked about. So I think positioning the third sector in the governance allows an authentic voice to keep challenging ourselves that we haven't forgotten. Third sector relationships are on many levels, aren't there? There's sometimes we just, we buy services. Other times there's a different relationship, and you can get quite a long way with that as well. So very warm to the third sector. We have some examples where third sector support embedded in communities is doing exactly what I said around managing need at the lowest level. Sometimes you just need a house cleared and cleaned, and those are the sorts of things that third sector can come into, low levels of support, debt advice, etc. So I think within that landscape of meeting needs, yes, absolutely there's a place for the third sector. Your question around the prevailing culture and what does it mean for frontline staff. I've talked today a lot about the senior structure because that's what I've been asked to talk about. Ultimately, it's the people on the ground who do the work, and I'm really clear about that. And whether that's us enabling people on the ground to do the work but through the services we provide, for example, into schools, or it's direct provision, such as the work we do with enabling families to stay together and be successful through social work or youth justice. That's where the work happens. And I think the job of leaders and managers is to mandate the confidence to the front line to work with the complexity and the risk and to keep going with the complexity and the risk, because that ultimately that's how you manage that population of need. You need people who can stay in it, but it's really, really tough work at times, and the rewards can be sporadic. So I think that's a cultural piece about high quality supervision, so that people understand the roles they're doing, they've got the support around them, and we invest in that. That's part of it. Sort of like lifting up into the how do I get my view of it. I talked about the reset of relationships. There's been a very significant piece of work to reset relationships with our trade union colleagues. I now chair the single JCC for the Directorate. Before it was dispersed and split into learning arm and care arm, and I've also met with the schools JCC. So that's part of our sort of check-in challenge of listening to the feedback that's coming from the unions. The People and Culture Board is very much focused on what are we seeing and understanding our organisational health, what are we learning from where have we got hotspots of sickness, what's the nature of the sickness, what's behind that. I'd love to have a service where there are no disciplinaries and grievances, but that is part of a large workforce. So we're seeing where those are happening, and we're asking ourselves the questions of, so what does that tell us? So the last board, for example, there was an area I thought, well, we need to know more about this. So we had, to have the conversation with the head of service about what support do you need to get to get this to a different place. And I think it's about being really intentional about those interventions. And an intervention isn't punitive. An intervention is around, we need a restorative intervention there because something's not working or there's been a breakdown in the relationship. So I think that's part of that mix of it. That's not to say we have some incredibly pressured teams because of the level of demand which is flowing towards them, and they're trying to manage within the resources that they have. So I want to recognise to this committee that we have got people who are under tremendous strain, as well as people who are doing an exceptional job within quite all that complexity.
Thank you, Pete. Shanaz, are you happy there?
Thank you. Sorry, if I could just add. Yeah. Yeah.
If I could come in on the housing question, it's crucial that a child grows up and families are in warm, safe, secure and suitable housing. So we have across the board, we have on a corporate parenting board, we have housing colleagues that sit on that board, foster care liaison group, housing are part of that meeting. We work really closely with this is our own housing colleagues, but we work really closely on innovation such as the Kirkstall accommodation that opened last autumn and brilliantly managed by somebody that we pinched from Guiseley, and that brings me on to, as well as opening our own small group living homes, but loads of work around with housing on purchasing a certain house for a family that might, you know, and for foster carers in terms of built houses extensions or that would enable them to take more foster children and keeping families together. Because one of the big barriers to reunification is that parents don't have suitable housing to take back their children. So they are in a position themselves where they are. So we're working really hard, but we also work really closely with the third sector. So I was at a NEAT conference. I've had quite a lot of conferences this week as well. At Ellen Road on Monday, and one of the key speakers was Julia from Guiseley, in terms of our young people, you know, needing that secure place to live and safe place to live, and that goes. And we couldn't be the child-friendly city we are without the third sector and without our private partners as well. This has to be tackled by a whole city approach, and different partners can bring different things. So what Leeds United Foundation and the Ryan Hills Foundation can offer, and our own youth services and youth association, and then all the different housing associations. So I know that in my area, the youth association, and work really closely with Clarion, who are a housing provider as well. So it's that partnership, it's working round a community, round families, and not thinking we can do it all, because we really can't and we never could. So thank you.
Happy with that?
No, thank you, really appreciate that. We've got young people who are living at home, sleeping on the sofas. It's just so overcrowded. And I think, yeah, like recognition for the third sector, we don't just clear the houses, you know, we're working with young people who experience CSE, young offenders, young people at risk of offending. We're providing advice, employment support. In addition to that, you know, we're working around to full holistic wraparound support to families. So yeah, I think it is really, really important that we act as a generous leader and share those resources and strengthen that offer so that we can continue the work that's happening. So yeah, thank you. Sorry, Chair, if I could just come back. That's why I'm here. It was that Year 9 pupil who couldn't do her homework because she didn't have a bed. That's what galvanised me to stand for election.
Thank you very much indeed. There are no more comments. Councillor Timmins, sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Just a very brief question, practical one actually. So just on the 5 chief officer roles, and I do think you may have answered this, but I just want to be sure. And it's in terms of preventing another technical breach in the future. Am I understanding right that each of the chief officers will have that statutory authority, and would there be an hierarchy of who would step in should the need arise?
Thank you, Councillor Timmins. So each of the 5 chief officer roles is on the same grade, so they have been created as equal status. We do require the constitutional change to be made, so there is a constitutional housekeeping to be done. At that point, each of those 5 roles will be designated as deputising, and then to manage that, there wouldn't be a hierarchy. There'd be more of a rota effect. But at any one time, somebody would be designated to be the deputy, and someone would be the reserve if they weren't in for any reason. So that takes us to a far more robust place where, you never say never. I mean, if there was we should probably never all travel in the same bus, but there shouldn't be a case where there is not a deputy on with you. The piece we need to watch is the transitional part to that full team being in place, and the Chief Executive here has already set out the arrangements which would happen in that case with deputisation across to the Director of Adult Services and, if necessary, to the Chief Executive himself. So we can manage that transitional space, but the preference is to get to the final solution quite quickly.
Councillor Timmins. Thanks very much indeed, Pete. No more comments or questions. We'll move on to the recommendations. The board is asked to note the senior management structure and capacity update and to identify any follow-up scrutiny activity that may arise, and we will be discussing this, of course, later in the year. Could someone propose we accept that recommendation? Seconder? All in favour? Any against? Abstentions? Unanimous. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 8, which is page 23 of your papers. It's the annual report of the Standing Advisory Committee for Religious Education. Davey, are you leading on this?
Yeah, I can do that. Good morning, everybody. Russell Trudgeon, who's the chair of SACRE, was due to be here this morning, but so I'm grateful that he's put into the report at section 1. He's actually got some of his notes there to overview the report. I know that members will have had the opportunity to read through, but I'd probably highlight just a few points from that. It's worth saying the function of SACRE is facilitated by the local authority. It's funded through the central schools funding block. We then engage with Pennine, so we contract with their consultants to provide the SACRE. We provide, and the local authority provides a clerk to the group. And then our link, my team's link, is particularly through Katie, who links in with the consultants to do that liaison. I think in the report, one of the things that Katie suggested with Russell this time, which I think is really helpful to members, and hopefully you can see that, is to actually use the advice provided to the local authority during the last report and provide a progress on that, which I think is really helpful to see how that advice has moved along and what's been done about that from last time. I think the local authority, we continue to support with the comms, developing links with the Leeds for Learning so that we can get more information via SACRE out into our school networks. And a couple of other points I'd probably just say in terms of future. We have, I think members will be aware that we have, the local authority facilitates the Leeds Learning Partnership, which is our 13 curriculum areas of networks of secondary leaders, and we're aligning the SACRE network more closely with our wider curriculum networks over the coming year, which I think will help. And then the final thing that I was going to highlight before opening up to members' questions and comments was around that I think SACRE feel that the report could viably come to scrutiny a bit earlier than sort of this time of the year. So that's something just for consideration for the future work programme. We think that it'd probably be ready February, March time rather than sort of this time. So just for consideration. So I think that was everything I wanted to pick up at this point.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, we picked up on the early, that's already in place for the current year. So thanks very much for raising it. I don't know if I missed it or not, but I think that there was a plea for more funding, I think. Very unusual in these days, I suppose. Have you got anything to say about whether or not you think the funding for SACRE is adequate?
I think there's a plea for funding increases across the board, and I think that it was mentioned last time about SACRE. The funding comes through the central block, and I think that there'll need to be a look at how that is, because it's integrated within DSG. We need to have the finance officers involved in that, and to have a look whether there is any potential increase for that. I don't know whether Councillor Hayden, I think we talked about that previously, haven't we, around any flexibility in that, but I think it's a challenge.
Yes, it's ongoing conversations. I mean, Dave's absolutely right. The funding to SACRA gets voted by schools, so as part of the schools forum. So it's not up to us to decide. I mean, we can suggest things and we can suggest an increase. We are about in the middle in terms of other local authorities when we've benchmarked it, but I believe that there is scope for a bit for further. Well, we also, but not as much as the national SACRA recommends, which I don't think we haven't found a local authority that hits their recommendation. There's a lot of in-kind support as well that actually does cost us money, but it's not given, such as our brilliant officers that support. And I'm really interested in actually how we can, as an organisation, use more of our resource. We're a very big organisation, so just like I was talking about housing and things like that, I'm really interested in looking at, rather than just increasing the budget, looking at more of our resource, maybe around transport. If we are, if SACRA are doing a particular event, just using our resources, that was off the top of my head, by the way, just using our resources across the council to support SACRA. I'm very, very passionate about it. I was an RE teacher for 18 years, so I went to SACRA meetings as an RE teacher, so they have my full and wholehearted support, because it's a tricky job teaching RE, but much needed, especially at this time in terms of social cohesion. And I just want to thank all our different faith communities and the work of the SACRA committee and Katie, and it just to on that promotion and development and support for religious education teaching, which is so profoundly needed at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. I like ongoing conversations. I'll come back to you in a second, Dave, so long as the ongoing conversations eventually finish up with a decision of some sort. Dave?
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things that Katie and I have started to review is to look at some of our network and some of our networks. There's a small charge to us to school settings coming into that, so we're reviewing that of whether there's something we can do as a local authority to make that no cost to schools, which will encourage. Not only will it put a bit of additional funding into the SACRA pot, ultimately it will also sort of encourage more schools, more educators to get involved in those networks and training. So we'll be doing what we can as well from a local authority point of view.
Thanks, Dave. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I've been connected with SACRA for a number of years since being elected, and it is an outstanding group of people, and I really appreciate the work that they do. I think it's so important, and especially with all of the discussions around community cohesion and bringing people together. I wanted to highlight one of the things in this report that they've been doing the last year, which is around teachers and teachers of religious education and going to different faith communities. So they had a day when they went to different places of worship, and I think this is an outstanding resource for schools. This is something that, and as a council, this is something that can really be promoted. A lot of schools have issues with transport, and yet within our city we have so many different faith communities, and it really brings it alive. So I wanted to highlight that, and to say that I think working with our faith communities is a very obvious way of improving the quality of teaching, and it's also free as well, which is always good news at this time. So I think that's something that I'd particularly like to highlight. The other thing as well, which has come up for some schools, is around transport, and particularly transport if they need to go to different parts of the city. I wonder if that's somewhere where the City Council could use some of our networks as well. So I know that, for example, First Bus have they have some support when it comes to schools, when it comes to community groups, getting to different places. I know from one provider in my ward how they were able to get that support from First, and I wonder if it's worth having some of those conversations to see. Having some of those conversations at the City Council level to see if there's more support that can be provided around transportation, because I do think this is a really important opportunity in every part of the city, including those parts of the city where there is maybe less religious diversity.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I think one of those was a comment and the second was a question, I think. Councillor Hayden, as you raised transport off the top of your head during your conversation a few minutes ago, perhaps you'd like to address that one before Dave does.
I think that's an excellent idea. I was also thinking of our school transport service that kind of works at the beginning and the end of the school day, whether there's some flexibility in that. When we had our youth summit, Northern Rail, they gave free train travel to schools in Garforth, you know, and cross gates into the city centre for their children. So there are those networks and our partners. So I think it's an excellent idea of using our own resources, but also our network of child-friendly ambassadors, etc., that can support this work.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Dave, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I agree that school transport is a massive issue for, you know, any school trips, any activity. It's, you know, I know from my time in schools, like, you know, actually it's what increases the cost to lots of activities. I wouldn't want to speak for all the networks we possibly have in Leeds. I'm sure they work in different silos to me, and I think I think certainly for Sacre, part of the advice would be around exploring those opportunities that we potentially could tap into. So we can certainly take that as a way forward in terms of exploring it.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor Timmins, Councillor Edwards, are you happy with that? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Timmins.
Thank you, Chair. Just to start off with endorsing Councillor Edwards' comments about faith trails. Having attended one, it was a fantastic day, and visiting them settings sometimes can give you a greater understanding of the communities that are using them. RE in school is really important. I think being in an age where there's a lot of misinformation being shared and people trying to demonise members of certain faiths, I think it's really important that we have a quality teaching on religion so that young people have a good understanding about other people in the community and, you know, why they may practice certain things on certain days, and learning actually what their religion is about. I do, however, feel included in that should be better teaching and understanding for those people with no faith as well. As part of community cohesion, I do think that's an important factor. In terms of the funding, the question for me, whenever funding comes up, what would the outcomes be for children and young people if there was more money for Sacra?
Dave?
I think we'd have to have, in terms of that last question, I wouldn't want to speak on their behalf. In terms of the comment about people of no faith, the humanists are, so, I mean, they have belief and a faith, but not in God, not in a God. So they are very much a key part of the Sacra community, and the logo and everything is there to and there is also some conversations around paganism as well. So it's not just the six world faiths that I'm very used to teaching about, but also those other kind of non-traditional or very traditional, very ancient in often ways, but that don't believe that don't contain a theology, that don't contain a belief in God. So in terms of what would it mean for SACRA, I don't know whether Dave and Katie have got anything to add, but I wouldn't want to speak on their behalf in terms of what further they could add.
In terms of the additional funding, I mean, additional funding, you'd like to, you know, without any sort of analysis of what that would do, additional funding would, you increase the level of professional CPD going on, you know, so there would be activities that you would do that you would target at improving the outcomes for young people, but you couldn't say this amount of money would mean this amount of difference in the exact outcome. But it would certainly, and I think it would increase capacity, yeah. So I'm not sure that answers fully.
Councillor Timmins.
Just to say from Councillor Hayden's response that obviously religious education has evolved in the quarter of a century since I left school. So because we didn't learn that, and I didn't know that humanist is that's what it represented. So yeah, just a comment.
No, thank you for asking the question. I think it's important because most of us haven't been in any sort of classroom for a very long time. So, and yes, it has evolved, and it was. Yeah, I started 27 years ago, training in September, and it does evolve, and that's the wonderful thing about teaching and learning religious education is that because humans evolve, it evolves and societies evolve, but a big part of it is morality and ethics, and that and just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. So, and that's I mean, I love teaching that element, philosophy and ethics, as part of religious studies and religious education, and I think that is incredibly needed at the moment as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Fisher.
Yes, thank you. I mean, obviously, I think we can all agree the teaching of RE is absolutely vitally important in a very changing world, and a world that is getting smaller and smaller. And as such, my concern is on page 4 that specifically states that, you know, not all schools are fulfilling their duty in this regard. And the report also states that obviously there is support in trying to support those schools, and yet at the same time on page 16 it says there was no training 24-25. In further bits of the report, obviously it states how difficult this training is. You know, you put it on, people don't attend, and I understand the difficulty with it, but I really just wanted to know what the next steps are to compel these schools to do what we know is their duty, and how we can support that and how we should be supporting that. But what are the next steps to making sure it happens?
Anyone like to take that one on? Casey.
Yeah, I'll answer that one if that's. I'll try to answer that one if that's okay. I think in part some of that may be addressed by the curriculum review, and you might have seen that RE is potentially now going to be included in the national curriculum. So I think that will kind of garner more interest, if I'm honest, from perhaps the people who are planning the curriculum within schools and the people who are teaching it. So I think that will help to bring more people on board. I think it's possibly that question is also linked to the funding, because the funding is linked to capacity. So I think you know, SACRA works within the capacity that it's got through our engagement with Pennine Learning. If there was an increase in funding, there would potentially be then an increase in capacity, which would allow further work and further training and things like that with schools. I think also what we're trying to do is link it in with our networks that we already have, so that the schools are already engaged kind of through other subjects. For example, so Dave mentioned the LLP, which engages with 13 different subject areas, is bringing RE into that and making sure that that's part of that, as well as being part of our primary learning partnership, which is sort of the same thing but in primary schools. So that should hopefully help increase that engagement with RE as well, because that's part of those subject networks and runs as part of that.
Councillor Fisher?
No, thank you.
Shanaz.
Thank you, Chair. I completely empathise and agree with colleagues about social cohesion and being really, really important. I think last time Sacre came, we spoke about getting more young people involved and becoming advocates of for schools. I'm just wondering if any work has been done around that. I'm just looking at the membership and there's no young people on there, I don't think.
My honest answer is I'm not sure, and I can try and find that out and follow that up, but it's not something that's been discussed at Sacre at the meetings I've been at, and I don't think it was discussed at the one in March, was it, to my knowledge, but I'll follow that up.
We can follow that up and we can certainly ask the question, going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Shanaz. Okay, there are no more questions or comments, I think, so we move on to the recommendations. We're asked to note the content and advice of the local authority as set out in the report, consider the funding of SACRA and to consider the membership of SACRA to ensure it reflects the breadth and diversity of the city in terms of faiths and beliefs. As we said, we'll bring this forward next year. Hopefully Russell will be available, and I think it'll be very advantageous to have him here, I think, given the breadth of the questions we've had. Can someone propose that we accept those recommendations? Seconded? Okay, Timmins. All in favour? Against? Abstentions? Thank you. All right. I think on that note, and bang on time, I think we'll have a comfort break for 10 minutes. See you back then. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to today's meeting of the Children and Families Scrutiny Board. Moving on to item number 9, which is the Local Area Special Educational Need and Disabilities and Alternative Provision Inspection Outcome. Pete, do you want to start out on this one?
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to start. Probably the first point to note for the committee is this is a local area report, and therefore it is jointly owned by both Leeds City Council and West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board. I won't rehearse the paper, because I'm sure members have read the report and obviously the Ofsted and CQC inspection report in detail. What I'd just like to frame, Chair, is the way in which we've approached receiving this report. We, as a partnership, we do welcome it. It's 10 years since Leeds was last inspected. 10 years is a very long time not to have an inspection. I would say it probably hasn't done any favours. It is important that we have a baseline. It is unequivocal in what needs to improve, as well as recognising areas of strength which are within the city. We accept the report fully from the Inspectorate, and important to say, we recognise that behind every area which is an area of improvement, there is a child and a family who are looking for a different experience and a different outcome. And that's important that wherever this conversation goes today, we keep those children and families' experience in mind. And as a partnership, we fully recognise the impact that delay has on children and the outcomes they achieve, and for that we are sorry. Within the report, you will see that there is strength, and we're very grateful to those operational staff who work really hard every single day to achieve against the odds for children, and we're grateful for the partnership, which is, if anything, I think the partnership has strengthened through the inspection process, not just because Ian and myself were new to the post at the time of the inspection, but the inspection forged our teams together, and we've seen that continue, which is important. Where we do want to pitch today is we want to be really clear that we aren't standing still. Anthony is with us as the chair of the independent chair of our improvement board. We've set that up prior to inspection to make sure that we were creating the governance with the sufficient robustness to hold all partners to account, and to hold ourselves to account in front of the wider partnership, including very valuably Parent Carer Forum, thank you, Maria. I know it's been a particularly frustrating time for you as a Parent Carer Forum, where you've been raising concerns but haven't always had the improvement that you have been advocating for, but also holding ourselves to account in front of our education colleagues as well, who are absolutely central to this system improvement. So I think I'll leave it there, Chair, as an introduction. I'm sure Councillor Hayden will want to say something, and then we'll be probably...
Councillor Hayden?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Pete. Yes, it's. I just want to thank everybody who was involved, especially Parent Carer Forum, who were very much involved in the inspection as well, and for all they do for our parents and families, and especially our children in the city. I want to thank all the frontline staff who, day in, day out, week in, week out, do their utmost in what is a broken system to support our children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. It's in terms of the urgent priorities, they are central to all our minds in terms of making sure that the improvements are made at pace and with people and with our families, so that we get much better outcomes, both primarily for our children, but their families, but also their teachers and experiences in support staff and their experiences in the classroom, in healthcare, and that partnership that we talked about in the first item, and those structural changes, I think will really help to drive forward this change of people working less in silos, of us working really closely with health and other partners in order to get a really good experience for growing up in Leeds when you have whatever need that makes life a bit more challenging, and also, you know, the wonderful positives that come from what good intervention looks like. I was at the Lighthouse graduation yesterday in the banqueting hall, and I was told off by the Lord Mayor for not bringing tissues, because I should always bring tissues. But what young people and children of all varying needs, what they can achieve, what they can contribute and add to our society, to our communities, is limitless. And they just need that support, that opportunity, that permission to be themselves and to be their best selves. And I think that, you know, we're on a journey, but we will make those improvements at pace that Ofsted need, but not because Ofsted need them, but because we need to do it, because our families and our children and young people need that improvement, and the will is there. I believe we've got the leadership model now, and Ofsted acknowledged that, to drive forward with clarity, and I'd like to enormously thank our independent chair, Anthony, who's here this morning, not only for being here this morning, but for that expertise and vision, but also, you know, that push to really drive us forward at pace. I'll leave it there. Obviously, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Anthony, Ian or Amber, would you like to, who would like to come in first on this one? Amber?
I'm happy to, Chair, thank you. So I just make a few points about my role as independent chair and what that means in this process. The first is to, as Councillor Hayden said, to make sure there's a culture of urgency, because for every child and parent affected, every day matters. So whilst we can say there's only 18 months until a re-inspection, which, believe you me, time will fly, we're already 3 months from the inspection process itself. And there are some distractions from the urgent timescale. Pete talked about the restructuring. It's essential, but that will inevitably take some focus away from delivery of core business if we're not careful. So I'd say the culture of urgency is the first thing I'd emphasise, and my role in that is to hold Pete and Ian as the local area partnership to account for delivering the right changes in the right way at the right time. But I'd say the most important thing is every day matters for some of the children and parents and carers involved. The second point is that somehow the agencies have to simultaneously manage demand, and demand is going through the roof, not just in Leeds but all over the country, particularly in the run-up to reforms, particularly for EHCPs, which is at the heart of the difficulties in the service at the moment. The second is to improve quality, and the third is to manage the budget. So the task is to manage the three together. And if it were easy, it would have been done already. So you've had review after review after review. So that goes without saying that it's an incredibly challenging project to manage over the next year. But the reason for urgency is that you don't want to get to mid-2027 with a huge amount still to do in the last 6 months before the re-inspection. And then I think, emphasise the importance of culture, because it's very easy when putting together the plans, Amber will talked to you about. Very easy to make this about tasks and process. But for some of the situations families are in, the culture needs to change dramatically towards them, to getting closer to them and to helping them. But I do think that one of the problems with the lack of urgency is because everybody is firefighting. And when you firefight, you don't allow yourself the time to solve the very problems that make you firefight in the first place. So my role is not just to hold people to account, but as Councillor Hayden said, to try to provide some additionality, some support from my own experience into how you can navigate a complicated improvement journey. And I've been fortunate enough to do this in several different places in several different roles, and I hope to bring that to bear through adding some value to what you have to do here. So the roadmap is clear, it's a good one. You've gone from a standing start to putting seriously good plans together, but what matters is that doing it is tougher than designing it. That's me.
Thanks very much indeed, Anthony. Amber, would you like to come in at that side?
Yeah, just to say as well, it is a highly complex system of SEND, as you all know, and it's not just about local authority, ICB, it's also all the partners, third tier, it's the AP, it's the vulnerable learners, so all of the things that were discussed earlier are all in scope for this as well. And quite often when we talk about SEND, we talk about EHCPs because that's the pressure that we have in delivering that statutory performance, but actually it's much wider than that. So what we've tried to do is make sure that the planning for all of those things is integrated. And you will know that we've been working on the SEND and AP reform plan, and there's lots of big changes coming down the line for schools and settings. So what we've also tried to do is make sure that they're integral in the conversations. Parents and carers definitely are side by side with us in all this work as well. And what we've tried to do is make sure that schools and settings and what they're expected to do as a result of the reforms are going to be reflected in the plans that we're doing to respond to the reforms, but also the Ofsted inspection outcome. And nobody wants to be in that category where we've been found to have those significant areas that we need to develop. But in looking at all of that work alongside the reforms, I think we have got to a place where it's coming together really well. So if we are going to be in that position, to do it at this time when everything's coming together gives us a really good setting for where we're going to be. And there's also an expectation that we review all of our plans that we had that were existing anyway. So regardless of the SEND inspection, we were identifying that those things needed to take place. And that has all been baked into the response. So we do have a priority action plan that we're working on to respond to the SEND inspection specifically. Would also like to provide assurance that we are addressing absolutely everything in that report. So whereas there are areas for priority action, there's 3 of those, and 4 areas for improvement, they will all be addressed with equal weight behind them. And when Ofsted come back to do the revisit, they will look at the priority areas, but the other areas will be a lot more advanced as well. We're also making sure that anything in the letter above the priority areas, where it said there's things that we need to do better, that is also aligned with the plan. So there's absolutely everything is being responded to. We will be monitored, so we'll have visits and stock takes. Again, that will be a partnership effort. And all of the work done to bring all of those plans together to this point has been a true partnership. And I think health colleagues have been around the table, social care colleagues have been around the table, parents and carers, we've done a lot of work, and I know I've said this a few times already, but we have to pay testament to the time that the Parent Carer Forum have put into working alongside us on all of these reforms. And it gives us a good grounding for the next 3 years, so it's and beyond. So we're looking at what's going to happen in the short term, i.e. the things that we have to do around experts at hand and delivering more provision within the city, which is the good news, because this brings additional investment. but also make sure that we can maintain that sustainability of provision and services that we have to do as business as usual, which is the thing that keeps coming up and has been, you know, it's been back to scrutiny a number of times because of that daily performance issue. We have to also recognise, though, at the same time that the demand is still rising. And as a result of the reforms, a lot of pressure has been added in terms of what schools are expected to do, their budgets, which were also mentioned earlier, and how we work with them to support them to prepare for the changes that they've got to do as well, is all part of this system. So in a nutshell, what I can say is nothing has been left unaddressed. We are going to address everything that we've found that needs to be dealt with. We've got lots of really dedicated people who are pulling out all the stops to make sure that that work is starting now. So we're not waiting for those plans to be approved. We're actually getting on with that job as well and delivering. And I'm sure there's millions of questions that you want to ask about the papers and the response to the priority action plan as well, which we're happy to take questions now. Yeah.
Just on the, I'll come to you in a second, Ian. Just on the priority action plan, I wonder if it's possible to bring it to us for the meeting we have scheduled for September. Okay. As Pete sort of said before, this is a sort of a partnership approach. It's an education, health and care plan. Delighted that Ian Bennett's here today, representing the sort of NHS. So, did you want to say something, Pete? Sorry, before we moved on.
Just a point of technicality, Chair, so we don't raise expectations. The priority action plan has to be submitted on the 6th of August. We will then get some feedback and a final version on the 22nd of August. So very happy to bring that plan back to scrutiny. I would suggest we probably have a look at the reform plan side by side so that there's an in-depth look at both because they are convergent, as Amber set out. So there won't be an opportunity for scrutiny to look at the plan prior to its submission because those are externally set timescales.
Thank you, Pete. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say a few words really in support of what's been said by colleagues before me. I think we mustn't underestimate the strength of the partnership in Leeds in terms of the work that needs to be done. Yes, we can look back and we can see where we've been and what has happened and ask ourselves why. But actually, the important thing here is now getting it right for the future. And I feel, as somebody who's just recently come back into the Leeds system in April, that the partnership is developing and is very strong, and we're having the right conversations and been held to account in the right way for what it is that is needed. It's very early, but I do think we've got the right structures in place to be able to do that and deliver both on the reform and on our SEND improvement plan. From a health point of view, health is very complex, it's very broad, and there are many different services and people involved in the healthcare system, and it's really important that we are speaking to and engaging and working with the relevant parts of the NHS, whether that's a provider organisation or whether that's the commissioning arm of the NHS in terms of what is needed at the future. But again, what is really clear to see is the commitment from our staff, whether that's in health, local authority, parent carer forum, education, etc. People are absolutely up for and willing to work. We just need to be really clear and give them the direction of what's required. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Ian. I think as Councillor Scope said earlier on in the meeting, I think this is the 13th time we'll have discussed SEND in one form or other over the last few years. And before I open it up to questions to the floor, I have to say I'm sort of quite impressed by the plans that you've laid out. And without sort of saying we've heard it all before, because I think it's entirely different from what we've heard before. We have been told on numerous occasions that things were in hand and extra resources were being brought in and so on and so forth. And here we are, a couple of years on, all the rest of it. I think Anthony made probably the most strongest point here about the importance of these plans to individual children. And it's not just from the initial issue of educational health and care plan, but also the annual reviews, which are also substantially behind sort of schedule in terms of progress and transition, and the legal responsibility the council has and the legal responsibility schools have, and basically the effect on individual sort of children. You know, I've often heard it described as the key to a child's future, and here we are, a long way behind providing what really should be the key to every child's future that has an education, health and care plan. So I'll open it up now to questions and comments. Councillor Stevenson first.
Thank you, Chair. I think my opening comment would be to start with thanks to our staff and leaders who have been working in a very difficult terrain over recent years. And I know from speaking to many staff at different levels, there's an odd sense of relief after this publication, which is not something you really expect. But there has been, somebody mentioned culture, there has been a culture of concern from staff around responses to concerns being, yes, but we're outstanding all the time, which hasn't been reflective of what they've been telling us has been happening, what parents have been telling us has been happening, and what Scrutiny has been discussing for quite some time. So we didn't need this Ofsted inspection to tell us what we already knew, because we've been saying it through Scrutiny and through council and the parents groups for quite some time. So it is an odd sense of relief that there is now humility, which is appreciated for where we are, and a direction to move forward. And I think credit has to go to the interim director, who was most definitely given a hospital pass to deal with, and has picked up the next stage forward, which, as you mentioned, Chair, is very impressive in terms of a direction of travel. I'll leave the politics to council next Wednesday, because the same can't be said for the political leadership. We'll leave that one for next Wednesday. I think it's worth thinking about those next steps in the improvement plan. And I think when you have an Ofsted like this, which talks about the voice of children and young people not being given prominence in EHCP plans, and the quality of EHCP plans being poor, it speaks to the heart of all the strategies that we hear of a lot here around child-friendly Leeds, the voice of the child, etc. You know, this is root and branch stuff. And because of that, I do have a concern around timings of the improvement plan being shared. I know we don't have control of the timetable, and the 6th of August is given, but there is an exec board on the 22nd of July. There is ample opportunity for Scrutiny to reconvene, even if it's by way of working group around that exec board. I think the wrong approach would be for those, some of whom were part of the problem, to be putting forward a plan to get us out of the mess without proper oversight and scrutiny before that is submitted to the Ofsted. So I think a reflection should be given before we get to full council on Wednesday, when that decision may well be taken out of the hands of the administration, to proactively engage with elected members, both on exec board and via scrutiny, before a submission would be an observation, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Stevenson. In fact, Pete, I and Rob have actually spoken about whether or not we should have a much closer look at this. We didn't talk in terms of timescales, I don't think, but it's a fair point to make, I think. I think probably that's for Pete and Anthony maybe to respond to.
Thank you, Chair. So appreciate the challenge. I think the culture which we're aiming for in the way that we should approached the planning, both for the reform plan and for the improvement plan, is to have a culture of openness to allow people to be part of that decision making and discussion, and that's credit to Anthony, who talks about open access and making sure that's the right way. So clearly, Chair, there are some sensitivities around the plan is submitted to DFE and NHS England and goes through their iterations. So it's not a public document until it is finalised. So we just need to be careful of that. But would very much welcome the opportunity to have a working group to have a look at the plan when we're further on prior to submission.
Anthony, do you have a view on that?
Yes, I agree. I think open access is crucial as part of changing the culture in general to be more transparent and open about the difficulties. And I welcome the honesty shown by the administration, by senior officials, by the NHS. That's a crucial first step. And I would say you took your eye off the ball in terms of what needed to be done, but the outstanding rating in SEND, even if the outstanding rating for social care, whatever you might think about that now, systemically are in the same place as a lot of councils who put most of their eggs in the social care basket, scored outstanding, and yet have also got the bottom rating in SEND. But just as that's happened, so some like Hertfordshire have quite quickly got through the re-inspection after the bottom rating by using some of the strengths of the council and of social care to transfer into SEND, which has been a relatively neglected area by comparison. So I think there's a well-trodden route, but yes, I think on behalf of children, parents and carers, open access and transparency at this point, including with elected members, is crucial.
Thanks, Anthony. Rob, is that something you think we can sort of work on?
Yes, Chair. Yes, I can take that away and firm up timescales as and through you seek to get something in diaries. Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed. Councillor Stevenson.
Just to say thank you. We have had a lot of robust debates here over the years, and I think members who have been here a while will recognise, and anybody viewing might recognise as well, a significant change in tone, and the humility is welcome on all sides, and we do appreciate that change in tone. I think that will be very productive going forward, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Helen.
So as somebody who represents school staff, my concerns are, well, if I just go back to a phrase or a slogan that NEU had during the pay campaign of 2023, and it's our working conditions, our children's learning conditions. And I've got real concern for the well-being of staff in schools. There are not enough staff. That staff are under a lot of pressure, workload is high, and then that staff in schools are so committed to meeting children's needs that feeling when you're unable to properly meet those needs is kind of, I think, the worst stress of all. And I think we, as a trade union caseworker, I go into schools and you see the motto, and it's all related to everything being marvellous for children. But I think those same, I don't know, words need to apply to staff as well. It's really integral that staff need to be well and supported in order for children to have a good experience in school, whether they be SEND or otherwise. And with these reforms coming in, I think educators understand it's right. We live in a very diverse world. We shouldn't have people who could be in mainstream and have their needs met better and more cheaply as well, in a way that can actually we can afford. But it needs to be done in a way that there are enough people to carry that out successfully for those pupils, and to keep staff, really good staff, in schools. There are workplaces I've shared information with staff and councillors. There are schools that we know where there are staff in, out, and that's because those conditions are very, very poor. and they're working under a lot of stress, whether it be through a negative culture or whether it be because it's just they're in such a difficult area with a lack of resources. So I think that is really, really important. The culture and well-being of staff needs to be there for that, for this to work for SEND children and all children.
Peter?
Yes, thank you for those comments, and I empathise with school staff. Been in that situation myself many years ago. I also have staff on their knees today. That is their reality, and they're working extraordinarily hard. I'll refrain from sort of talking about national funding and how money for schools moves around, but it is a well-rehearsed argument that the way in which schools are funded is actually almost anti-inclusion. I think you'd probably recognise that. I think looking forward, this is where the reforms need to wrap the right support around schools, so that teachers who are working in our schools, working with our children, have the best chance of meeting that need in a way which doesn't build the frustration that you've described, or that sense of I can't do this, it's just too stacked against me. That won't alleviate every pressure in school, but not by any way. But I think, Amber, if you could just talk us through a little bit more about what the experts at hand actually means for the support around the teaching profession in school, I think that would be helpful. And just a reminder that the experts at hand, that is an additional 3-year funded programme above the specialist support that we already provide for example, for children with hearing impairment.
I think you've probably heard many times as well that early intervention is always best for children and young people, to identify needs early, to stop that escalation into high cost and high demand needs when you get children and young people with EHCPs. And I think it's been quite frustrating for a lot of local authorities for a long time that they haven't had the services to go in and work with children and young people and with schools at that early identification and intervention level. And I think the reforms are going to make that different. And you don't very often get the amount of money that we're being gifted in terms of a grant funding to do that work. So we have our existing system that also services children and people with EHCPs, works alongside schools and settings, but I know there's not enough of that to do all the work that schools need to be done. So a lot buy in additional capacity themselves. They buy in private EPs and speech and language therapists. So in this new transformation period, we've got an opportunity to readdress that and work alongside schools to make sure that that support is going into the front line and working shoulder to shoulder with schools, teachers, teaching assistants and trusts and clusters, and however we can do that best to get that support in schools. It will provide additional speech and language therapists, educational psychologists, occupational therapists and specialist teachers. And what we also want to do is make sure that that is working alongside schools to give them what they need. So we've had quite detailed discussions with primary heads and secondary heads to ask them what works for them, what is that support that they want to see working alongside them in schools and settings. And we will tailor that design of experts at hand so it does that job that they want to see to support them to do that. There are limited resources, despite the 6.6 million investment, which is the first year's grant funding. It doesn't stretch everywhere because it's got to be an offer for school settings, early years, post-16, and all children and young people outside of Leeds who belong to Leeds, so Leeds residents. So it's going to be quite a complex system that we create, but nonetheless it is going to bring a wealth of expertise into schools that's currently not there. It does also mean that the business as usual around existing support and provision around EHCPs continues. So the new transformation funding is designed to target that targeted and targeted plus areas in schools, so it's pre-EHCP. So from that perspective, it's what we've all been waiting for a long time. So we're seeing it as very positive. We want to work with partners to deliver that, so it does the job from day one as well. So we're expected to have an offer from September this year. Obviously, recruitment to those key posts is going to be difficult, especially because all local authorities are trying to get more EPs, speech and language therapists, and all of the other things I just mentioned. So we are looking at how we can do that best. So out of extending what we've already got in terms of capacity, if we can build on the capacity that already exists in our health provision and in our own EP services, and try and extend that, that's what we're going to try and do. And Experts at Hand will enable, hopefully, that work to then take place in schools, to work alongside teachers, teaching assistants, heads, to target that good practice that then alleviates the pressure on what schools are expected to do all the time by themselves. There's also other implications around inclusion bases, which is another part of the transformation world, and all secondary schools are expected to have a mainstream inclusion base over the next few years and develop that. And again, they've been given some grant funding to be able to do that. I wouldn't say that it's entirely enough for what they're expected to do out of that funding, but they are already creating their own provision, and some schools have got those inclusion bases that already exist that they're going to be looking at how they can extend into the future under the new transformation period and expectations. And what we also want to do around that is look at our sufficiency. So what do we need to create in schools and settings that we can commission from? So where do we need to create specialist inclusion bases that the local authority can commission places for children and people to prevent the need for special school places, which then prevents the need for out of area and independent schools as well. So there's a whole turnaround of the system that's planned over the next few years. And if we get it right, we can achieve that. And I think it's working with schools and settings to make sure that that is done in collaboration with them. And we see this as a partnership thing. The money that's coming into Leeds has got to do good for children and young people in Leeds, and it certainly will, because having that amount of grant funding is a bonus. So we've got to make the most out of it, and we will do it together. We're determined to deliver. Part of that is encompassed within the SEND reform plan. Also, it's part of what we wanted to do anyway, so build that sufficiency in schools and settings, using high needs provision, capital allocation funding as well, which already exists. So again, it's all those plans coming together. It makes quite a complicated picture, but it will be of benefit. It's just going to take a few years to see that benefit, I think. So whereas there'll be lots of planning now, and then we're starting to deliver and implement, the lived experience and what children see at the end of that and what families see at the end of that is going to be a gradual process. So it's not going to happen overnight, but there are steps being taken to make sure that it does happen, and we will achieve. In relation to the performance monitoring, it will go through Improvement Board, and we will report on data on how much we've delivered, but also the impact it's having in reality. So we want to start doing that from now. So we're not waiting until Ofsted come back. We're actually going to be recording that and getting baselines. So where we are now, what families tell us now, and how that can change over the next 6 months to a year to 2 years. And that will always be the conversation. And the monitoring, definitely, always the conversation as well.
Thank you, Amber. Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, and that was really good to hear, Amber, and really well explained. Thank you. Really welcome. And the word transformation was used a couple of times, and schools are desperate for it and for that support. But teachers are not going to trust it until it's like actually on the ground. I'm very, very confident that this will happen, that we have the plan we've got the grant funding from the government, which is found, and we've got the guidance from the white paper, and that's SEND transformation, because not only over the last decade and a half have schools been funded to not be inclusive. Ofsted, when they go into schools, when they are judging schools, they don't judge on how inclusive a school is, but how academically the academic achievements of schools, which, and I've said it before, which means that we've got not just children with SEND, but a third of our cohort written off probably from the age of when they start in year 7, and they know it. They know that they're not included because they're not going to get 8 academic GCSEs. And I hear it from my own son. I'm not going to pass, Mum. I'm not going, you know, and it breaks your heart that at 13 years old they already feel written off, and that's because of the emphasis on an education system and outcomes that don't suit today's world, and certainly don't suit our children and don't suit our teachers, who are desperate to teach to the abilities of all children and to enhance their abilities. As somebody who worked for 11 years in a school with a resource base and has taught children with a whole range of needs who were fully included in the school, and taught them RE, from children who have Down syndrome to children who were traditionally academic, like I was. That going back to that that way of teaching, that way of our schools being inclusive, is of such welcome. And because it's coming from the government, then Ofsted will change, and they will change their processes. I mean, they've already changed their framework, but they will change what they are judging, and that's when schools will fully change, because that's the big lever, is the Ofsted inspection of each individual school.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Helen. Yeah.
So, you know, the plan, it does sound like a fantastic plan, and I think the direction of travel for SEND sounds absolutely the right way to go. The grant, you know, it's great to have that money, but I think we're looking at, again, you know, although we represent all school staff, we can only bargain on teacher pay, and we're looking at 3.5% not fully funded again. I don't know how many years it's been not fully funded at the NEU. There's a national executive meeting that I'll be at, and we'll be looking at whether we can ballot on funding, because that is the biggest thing that educators are concerned about. Yeah, the teacher wages, support staff wages have gone down in real terms 20-25% over the last 10-15 years, but funding is still the biggest issue that staff have, and it's just how we're going to deal with that in the interim, in this period when these changes are beginning to take place, how we're going to support schools at this time. Thank you.
Anyone like to come back on that one?
I'll bring in Amber. I'm happy to come. Yeah, I agree. We have now a 3-year funding for teacher pay, which is very welcome. Instead of waiting every year, but the first 1% will come out of school budgets, which is not ideal, and I wouldn't want that. We'll keep pressing, keep lobbying, and yeah, in conversations that I'm having, that support for schools, especially during this transformational period in the SEND reforms, is what's crucial, and funding is the most important aspect of that. Amber, if you want to.
Just to add to what I said earlier, in working with schools, I've visited some schools in Leeds since I've been here, and I've seen some exceptional practice that already exists, that some schools are delivering some exceptional work, that I was blown away when I saw that. And it's not just a bit of it, it's like the whole school is geared up for supporting all children and young people, regardless of needs, and creating inclusion bases themselves, and putting lots of investment in from their own funding to achieve that. And I think one of the things that I've talked about with local leaders in that from those schools and in primary schools and secondary schools is to talk about how we can use some of that grant funding so it can be within the setting, rather than it being an external centrally based provision that comes in and supports. So we're having conversations about how we can develop local schools who are experts themselves. So when we talk about experts at hand, they are at the front line. They do see the children and young people all day, every day. So if we can come up with a system that we're allocating funding through a service level agreement or a memorandum of understanding to those local expert schools who can then support their local communities of clusters of schools or communities, that's the model that we're exploring with them. So whilst it won't take away budget pressures, which are difficult, I think we've all recognised that it has been an issue for a long time. We want to make sure that if we have got resources, we can get them in situ so they can do some good in schools on a daily basis, and they're not just parachuted in and then leave again. So we don't want more of the same. We want that to be a different way of working that we've not had so far. And it could mean that there's out of that 6.6 million, a third of that could be used for specialist teachers, but they aren't additional ones that sit centrally. They're ones that actually in schools now, supporting other local schools and settings as well. So we are looking at using the resources that do, it's always multiple things. So nothing comes in that can only be used for one purpose. We always have to look at how it can extend into lots of other areas to make lots of other things better, easier. But I also think it's testament to some of our schools and settings that is seen, it is visible. The amount of funding that they do put in themselves already is amazing. I don't know how they do it in some cases.
Briefly, very briefly, Councillor Hayden, we've got a lot of speakers coming up.
Just to add to that, I visited one of our silks 2 weeks ago, and they are working through the clusters with local schools to spread that expertise, that huge expertise. So it's already happening in the city. Our schools are taking these reforms on because they desperately wanted them for a long time, and they're running with it already.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Amber. Councillor Fisher.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the response to the report, and I'm absolutely confident that moving forward things will be improved, and that's great. I am absolutely confident in that and what you've said. However, it's not about the next step. It's those children who are in this now, and actually you're talking a lot about, in years to come it'll be fine, in this, months to come it'll be fine, 18 months. The thing about children is they grow up. They don't stop because this report is there. We've got children who it's taken 3 years to get an ECHP. They're a looked after child. Social services are involved. The police are involved. The ECHP says that this child should be in a special school. There's no place in a special school, so they're not in a school. There's no joined up thinking. You have parents who have a conversation with one social worker, and the social worker says, well, we'll bring you back. Another social worker rings and needs to tell the whole story again. You've got 2-3 different police officers that are in charge, and nobody seems to be taking responsibility of these children. So I think when we talk about urgency, and I understand the urgency, it's 18 months that we've got to sort, it's where's the urgency now? How are we protecting and how are we moving these children forward now? And I think also, as a second point, I think often the children who are really, really, really in need, of course, they're the ones that we focus on. They're the ones we move really quickly on. And of course that's right. But when you've got a child who just seems to fall in between, they're not really, really serious, but actually they're on the cusp of it, they're somehow the ones that are lost. And as I say, children are growing up. As we're having this discussion, they're getting older and older and older. A child, today that's 15, in 18 months, is 18 months on, and the time and the clock is ticking. And my concern is those children now who need the help, where it's really disjointed, and the urgency around that.
Councillor Hayden.
The work has been going on for, years and months. I'm acutely aware. I'm not waiting 18 months. None of us are. We had our first meeting with the independent chair in March, I think, yeah. So we haven't waited for the report. We were on with this work long before. In terms you mentioned children looked after, their EHCPs are prioritised. They won't be, no child looked after should waited the 3 years for their EHCPs because they're on a different, once they become looked after, they're on a different, and the team around them, you're quite right about the ones who are not, families are managing but not quite managing, the children are falling between gaps. There's the ones that I really worried about once they come into our care. And yeah, I'm not going to apologise for our social care ILAC last year being outstanding. It's one of the reasons that but yes, this is not, and I really welcome what Anthony said in terms of using our outstanding practice with our children looked after and with our care leavers that we saw inspected last summer to inform our improvement with SEND. But SEND is a partnership, and yes, children are growing up. I have two that are growing up very, very rapidly. One with SEND needs. So I'm very well aware that you only get one childhood, and we're doing it now. We're not waiting 18 months, because when I was teaching GCSE, you didn't wait 18 months to start the course. That's when they sat their exam, and we will have timeframes when it's going. But and we will have those things. But as somebody, a great person I worked with when I was teaching said, you don't fatten a pig by weighing it. So we have to get on with the work. We are getting on with the work. And it has to be more than EHCPs. It has to be our health colleagues and those assessments for children who need it. But as Amber mentioned, and I want to talk about even more, if we get in the help into schools, into nurseries, much earlier on, into our health visitors when they're first visiting the child, midwives, health visitors, children's centre staff, when the child is first born, those Best Start and Beyond that we call about the first 1,000 days, if we get it right there, we won't have the need for children to have an EHCP when they go to school and going on, because that support, A, will stop things escalating, but B, the team around it will make sure that the support is given, that they don't need that specialist intervention later on. So yes, we're totally focused on the children who need an EHCP now. Schools don't get the funding until the child's got an EHCP. And the families don't have clarity. We are working on that now. We have got an independent chair who's the improvement board is working at pace, all different subgroups and what's happening there. So very acutely aware, and our first priority, because we are the corporate parent, is our children looked after.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Don't think it entirely answered the question that was asked. Anthony.
Okay. Yes, well, I think what's really important is to make continuous improvement now, and not to have a false start or something that goes in the wrong direction and wastes more time. But you have failed a number of children and families. That goes without question. Even outstanding authorities are failing some children because, as Councillor Hayden said, the system is broken. That's why it's subject to profound reform. Demand outstrips supply, skill sets and so on. The difference is you're failing more children, but that won't change overnight. What you have to be able to show to parents, carers, schools, is that the number of children who have failed is reducing over time. And to do that, it has to be approached like any improvement journey, methodically, with a proper plan that is implemented, that people are held to account for, and so that you start to see over maybe 6 to 12 months. You won't see much for the first 6 months. It would be very tempting always to say you'll see something immediately. But when you need profound systemic culture change, it takes many, many months. The average improvement journey to get from systemic weaknesses, which is the finding here, to a good level is 3.5 years. So what you have to show after 18 months is significant progress towards that. But you can't be at the position you're in and have been in for several years. The most rapid improvement journeys in the country have all taken 2 years, and that's when everything has been in place a fast start going in the right direction with a critical mass of skilled people to do it. And what is important from this conversation, I think, is to begin to build confidence amongst parents and carers, who we heard yesterday, Maria, are still not massively confident, to say the least. Confidence by schools and teachers, by frontline staff providing the service, whose confidence also needs to be rebuilt after this. So I'm cautioning, however rapidly and urgent you make the changes, it will take time. And I'd say, yes, do come back in September and look, but what you will see then is the building blocks. You won't see the profound changes in everyday experience for several months.
Thank you, Anthony. Pete.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Anthony, because I think hopefully I think from across the people at this end of the table, the sense of determination to get this right is coming across. I was going to say something similar to Anthony, but with probably not quite the gravitas. At the moment, we have issued 1,065 plans this year. But we have 3,500, almost 3,600 in process. So I think it's important that we keep hold of the scale of the challenge. This is, we know there are contextual factors to Leeds. The ending of the funding for inclusion, for example, was a unique to Leeds. We're not offering any of that as justification or excuse, but we do have to understand the scale of this, Chair. And I think probably I'm making the point so we don't have another sense that over-promising to scrutiny and then not being in the place we wish to be later down the line.
Thanks, Pete. I think you've both made exceptionally good points. We have been promised things in the past and they just haven't sort of come to the fore. So I think a very honest approach, which is what we're getting at the moment, with no promises about what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after or whatever, is not very satisfactory, Councillor Fisher, from your point of view, I know, and from the point of view of children, but we have to start somewhere. And I think it's been a reasonable start, bordering on very good at sort of times, but we're still very early on in the process, I think. So I know you won't be happy with that, but if we can then sort of move on, or would you like to come back on it?
No, I appreciate the replies.
Much indeed. Councillor Scopes.
Thank you, Chair. So firstly, start with a thank you for accepting the findings of the report. I think that's really important. Secondly, I agree with what Councillor Flynn said earlier around this being a key to children's futures. But I'd also add it's fundamental to family futures as well. So I know a number of parents who have been waiting a long time for neurodiverse assessments, some of whom also have neurodiversity themselves, and waiting for a long period of time is very, very challenging. I'd also like to recognise there is 2 pages, I think, of good things that are in the report, and I think we should acknowledge that, and that should be celebrated. But I'd also say that I think leadership is a factor in a number of the challenges. For example, on page 6 of the report, paragraph 4, it says a lack of suitable training and guidance for all those who contribute to EHC plans. I think I'd make the case that a well-led organisation would be training its staff effectively. I was going to talk about assurance of the plans, but I think that's been raised sufficiently, so I won't revisit that. But I do have some questions. So one question for, I guess, the Council and Pete is on bullet 2 on page 7. It says young people do not get the support that they need while they wait. I know we've just mentioned FFI. Is it time to bring that back? And then I think the second thing I'd like to talk about is probably more on the NHS side of things. Last time I checked, and I might be out of date, that for young people there's a 2-year waiting list for a neurodiverse assessment. And as Councillor Fisher put so well just a minute ago, 2 years is too long for children. My children, I've got a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, 2 boys, and that's a 3-year gap, and it's chalk and cheese in terms of where they are in life, where they are in maturity, where they are in everything. And I think that's really hard. And then on top of that, I think for parents who are struggling to cope, so there's a fantastic group that I've talked about before here, Fantastic Parents group in my ward. And if you go there ever, you'll hear parents that are struggling to cope, waiting for assessments. And I think the question is here, it says, on page 8, it says children need to be supported while they're waiting. So I want asking about what is being done to support children who are waiting, and I guess also what has been done to reduce the timetable. So I guess those are my 2 questions. I just also think we just need to be a little bit careful. I just push back on this. I definitely think we need a culture of urgency, but at the moment it's hard to accept it's there because the data doesn't show it, and so I think we need to embed it rather than, and I know we need to talk about it as well, but we need to embed it so that actually happens. And I guess one more comment. I think we're getting a slightly mixed messages here. Are we starting today, or has the work been going on for a while to get the improvement? And I think it's important to say that whilst we know it's going to take time to see improvements across the board, we also need to try and accelerate that as quickly as possible, because children currently waiting and parents who are currently waiting for their children to have assessments, it's a really difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scopes. Anyone?
So I'll pick up the neurodiversity ADHD question first, if that's okay, Chair. You're absolutely right in terms of the waiting lists and the time on those waiting lists. This is a national issue across ADHD and neurodiversity, recognising the challenges that we've got here in Leeds, but it does mirror the national picture around that. There are things in place which I just want to talk about a little bit whilst people are on the waiting list, and some of the numbers that we've currently got at the moment. In March 2026, there were 582 people on the waiting list, and that has now reduced down to 426. So that's a 20% reduction just in those few months. Now, there's much more work that we need to do there, but in terms of your question around, are we starting from a zero position? No, we're not. We've been doing the work for some time, and with those reductions that we are seeing, we are going in the right direction, recognising that this will take, as we talked about previously, some time to actually do that. You also mentioned the hubs within your own ward and the supports that are available. Neurodiversity hubs are a main source of support for children, young people and families with SEND whilst they're waiting for that assessment. And we do get good feedback in terms of the support that's available and some real practical advice of what parents can do and children to support whilst they're on the waiting lists. There is some work that we're doing around with our provider organisations, so Leeds Community Healthcare and Leeds and York Partnership Trust, around the business cases that we need to be able to increase the resource within the teams so that we can further reduce those waiting lists. I think one of the big things I would say around that is once we get those business cases approved, it is anticipated that we would be in a position to reduce those waiting lists significantly within the next 18 months. A few more points just to pick up on what's been said there. One of the things available in terms of treatment is medication, of course, for ADHD and neurodiversity. And we were in a position in January 2025 where only 5.7% were seen within that 18-week target, and we're now currently seeing them all within the 18-week target. So there is some good progress that's been made there in the position that we had previously.
Okay. Thanks, Ian. Peace, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll bring Amber in on the specifics around the leadership training and the support for waiting in a minute. Obviously, my previous presentation talked about the senior leadership position where we are, so I think that's obviously been noted earlier. I think it's a really interesting point about FFI. FFI was, I wasn't here obviously for FFI, however, having admired it from afar, you could say that at the time Leeds took a really bold decision to invest money into schools and trust schools to meet that need. Unfortunately, as you'll know better than I, that was then deemed that that's not an acceptable way to deploy the money, and the challenge of bringing it back would be that to link FFI to an individual child would be seen to then subvert the proper process, which is the EHCP, which would therefore land us back in hot water. So whilst I think that's I can understand the logic. It's unfortunately it's just procedurally not possible, but there was something in it that because Leeds had taken that bold decision, and I genuinely believe it was done with really good intent. It suppressed the number of EHCPs to exactly the place where the government is now trying to take us to with the reforms. So the peril of being ahead of the game is now that we are behind the game, and then the only way for schools to get the funding and for needs to be met is through the EHCP process. So there is a bit of a bitter irony in there, but we can't go back to that funding model, unfortunately. I think there is, just related to that though, is we just need to be really careful with the EHCP process as it exists. That we, and I think Anthony touched on this earlier, is we just don't keep follow it. We don't crank the handle on the process and lose sight of the child in there. So the HCP process is unrelenting. It's very short time scales. It's very tight to get through. It's reliant on all sorts of parts in there. But that's not the end product that we want. What we want is the right provision for the child, which gets us to gets the right outcomes. Nevertheless, to comment on have we made any progress, previous to this scrutiny board there was a report which talked about the extra investment on the recovery project for 2,000 plans or 2,000 children's EHCP applications which are out of time. In the first 12 weeks of that project, 384 draft plans with 148 finalised. So that clearly is work which was, you'll appreciate the long run-in for commissioning in local authorities. That work was started way before this report came out.
Thank you, Pete. Before Anthony comes in, Amber, would you like to comment?
Just on the waiting well aspect, we also have an education offer. So there are those services that we've talked about already, like the EPs and specialist teachers that we do have available, do work alongside schools and settings for any child who's on that neurodivergent pathway. So that support is available at that level. And as I said earlier as well, a lot of schools buy in additional support themselves, which obviously puts budget pressures on schools, but they still do that. It does exist. And we work really closely with our health colleagues across ICB and providers. And a lot of the work that was tested through the change programme over the last 2 years, 18 months before now, some of those projects did a lot of really good work in schools and settings and are being carried forward as part of experts at hand. So things like speech and language therapy projects that was in pilot schools, those things will be extended further. And the EPs also offer training to schools and settings, and there's lots of training from the specialist teacher teams and the inclusion mainstream provision work, which is also getting quite a lot of emphasis behind it, and a lot of schools involved in that, developing it and rolling it out. So there is support out there. I think probably we'd all like to see more of that, and that's what we're aiming to get more of that on the front line, so it's embedded and it's not having to be requested. We also need to look at the traded offer and whether we're putting all our eggs into trading and generating income through that world, and do we need to reshape how we do those particular aspects of what we do in terms of our work as well. And EPs, as you know, are very stretched in terms of firstly filling those vacancies, getting the right people and not having to rely on agency staff. But we do have a strong core of EPs who do a lot of work that's not around the statutory process. It is about whole school development and support for SEND and increasing capacity across settings and across trusts. So there's a lot going on in that sense. And just to add to what Pete said about the FFI, I think it was good intentions, it was a good system, but it has got us into the point where it's really contributing to that very high demand in EHCP needs assessment requests at the moment. I think it's 22% more this year than it was last year, which shows the rate at which that is coming in. The teams don't grow at 22% capacity. So it's trying to balance that, and it does have an impact, obviously, on what teams can produce. We don't want to be in a position where we're relying on agency staff in the future. In the short term, to address the difficulties in performance at the moment, so back to the question that was raised earlier about what are we doing today for those children and young people, we are bringing in agency staff where we have those gaps to make sure that we can fill those roles. But it is still a challenge, and it will take time to turn that around. And in relation to annual reviews, which you asked earlier, a question about that, we obviously aren't performing as good as we should do around annual reviews, but we are trying to target the ones that are going to make the most difference. So those that are transitions for children and young people moving to primary to secondary, those sorts of transition reviews, so we can get placements right. Again, still a long way to go. I don't think we're shying away from the challenges and what's in front of us on a daily basis, but there are things that are happening now that we're trying to increase capacity to make sure that that can be delivered better and improvements can be made at pace as well.
Thank you, Amber. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to speak to the point about possible mixed messages and when did improvement work start. And Pete started at the end of January and quite quickly assessed there were significant problems in the service and took that approach into the inspection so that the inspectors were not in some way misled that things were better than they were. So the honesty started pretty soon after Pete did, and I'd like to commend him for that. I'd like to also commend the administration because Councillor Hayden and Councillor Lewis instantly made it a top priority for the council, and that's important too. I work with a number of councils who challenge inspection findings like this and waste several weeks or months in futile challenges about the wording of inspection reports. So the fact that it was accepted and that they got on with it straight away is to their credit. I'd also say that I work in a lot of systems where health are invisible, and Ian has approached this through the NHS jointly with the City Council. It is a partnership, and that's why on the position about ND assessments, there's a better story to tell than in some other systems. You can look at them in West Yorkshire where the waiting list is thousands. So I'd say the improvement work started pretty much back in February or March through acceptance of the fault lines, and then as fast as possible putting building blocks in place. What I'd say about the culture of urgency, which is the phrase I used, is there's been a culture of urgency about creating a culture of urgency. but that it won't happen unless you put those building blocks in place.
Thank you, Anthony. We've overdone our time, but I'm quite happy to stay here for as long as it actually takes. I hope it's not going to put too many people out. Fortunately, there's nobody coming into the room after us like happened on one previous occasion, I think. Anthony, sorry.
It's just one more point about the politics of this, that in my experience as a commissioner in many councils and doing this, I just urge you as far as possible to depoliticise children's services, especially SEND or corporate parenting. And those systems who do best do depoliticise the work at this really important point in time. It's tempting to not to do that, but you can create more success by cross-party unity.
Thanks very much indeed, Anthony. As you probably gathered today, we've kept politics completely off the table, and that's going to be my policy for the future. Just continuing what I said before, we have overrun. More than happy to continue for as long as is necessary, but I would ask, we have 3 further speakers and we've got a couple more items on the agenda yet. If you could keep your questions as brief as you can and answers too, I'd be very grateful. Councillor Edwards. Not quite that brief, but that'll do. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Goodall.
Thank you. We've talked a lot in previous meetings about the delays. We haven't talked as much about the quality, although we have covered that a bit today in saying in terms of lack of training and quality assurance. One thing that we haven't picked up on that parents and carers and teachers have said to me several times is where meetings have been online to assess, where parents, carers, teachers have said it's not actually possible to assess that child online, you need to do it in person, and also where there have been assessments where the child hasn't actually been there. So I just wanted to kind of make sure that point was got across, that in terms of quality, that's a really important point. The other thing I wanted to ask is, from my perception, this Ofsted inspection took up a lot of everyone's time, and I meant to say at the beginning, thank you to everyone who's working in these really difficult circumstances. But the Ofsted inspection seemed to take up a lot of everyone's time. When we've got the kind of repeat interim inspection in 18 months and the main inspection again in 3 years' time, are we putting something in place to make sure we can continue business as usual with everything else we're doing, as well as everyone responding to the inspection? Because it really did seem to take resources away from other areas.
Pete?
Thank you, Councillor Goodall. I think I preferred Councillor Edwards' this question. Well, first of all, thank you for recognising the strain that inspection puts on staff. Across the partnership, we could not have asked for more. So, and that's from colleagues who are in schools, health settings, early year settings, out in the community, colleges, even down to our museums and galleries, because we're focused very much today on the process failures, but the SEND inspection goes everywhere. It's around the whole experience that children have growing up and into adulthood, growing up with special educational needs and disabilities. So thank you for recognising that. We have, as part of the sort of whole approach to, which I described earlier, around how the Directorate works, we are consolidating our functions around evaluation and inspection readiness. However, you are right, we had 3 weeks of inspection, and then it was the bank holiday, and then we had the 4 days afterwards, and you effectively lose a month to inspection. I have no doubt that will be exactly the same when they come back. We did continue business as usual, but it did put a huge strain on people, and people were extremely tired at the end of it. But so I can't guarantee you that won't be the case, because the very nature of our staff is they step up and they step into that space and they go above and beyond. And they do it because they care, and it's not about just getting the best report, it's about representing the city they serve.
Councillor Goodall.
Thanks, that's fine, I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Shanaz.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Goodall asked about online assessments. I don't know whether... is that the health assessments?
It was the EHCP assessment. Right, okay. So it's the educational psychologist.
Okay, so just in terms of being completely frank and open, the conversation we had at the SEND Improvement Board yesterday was, are we convinced that our operating model for EHCPs is the correct operating model? And we need to go back into that and reflect, because there is... I'm very confident that because of the council's commitment that there will be extra resources for SEND, both in year and baked into the medium-term financial plan, obviously subject to budget setting processes. So I'm confident of getting the resources. My two biggest risks with that are A, do we crank the handle on the machinery which is not the right machinery? So it's not that we aren't following the statutory process, but could our operating model do that better in a way which is far friendlier to families and gives, even when we can't reach the 20-week time, gives a far better quality of experience. That's one. And the second risk is, regardless of resource, where are the people going to come from to actually do the work and drive the direction? And Amber's alluded to some of that in the reforms, that we cannot knit education psychologists or OTs, unfortunately. So so within that operating model, there will be questions around, is it acceptable to do remote assessments? There's a question mark over that. Amber's probably closer to being able to give you an answer on the detail of that. But accept the points you're making, so thank you for raising them.
Thanks, Pete. Shanaz.
Sorry, I was just going to add, I think some of the things that were in the Ofsted report around quality assurance you probably saw, and I think that applies to the statutory assessment process and annual reviews, alternative provision, inclusion bases, all of the things around the things that we have to perform as functions but also commission for our children and young people. The quality assurance that used to be in place, I think, in Leeds over time has reduced, I think, and that's recognised in that report. And we need to revisit some of that good practice that was there, make sure that we can put it back again and extend it to things that we know have never existed and we want to get them better. And that's reduced possibly because of the demand. And a lot of resources have stopped being able to do really good quality pieces of work like EPs. If they've got to do 10 assessments in a week, then it might be easier to do some of those online because they haven't got time to get around to everybody and do that quality work that they want to do. I do know that EPs and the Royal College for EPs, is it the Royal College for the main body, the discipline body that governs them, are telling them what the quality is. And we want to revisit all of that to make sure that whatever is the highest standard, that's embedded in our system. There's going to be a whole piece of work on quality assurance framework across all of that, including inclusion bases that exist and those that are going to be created. So again, it's working with schools on those issues. But quality assurance, I think, is 100% top of the agenda, because if we do lots of functions and perform lots of things, if they're not of good quality, they're not going to make a big difference to that child or young person or family. So with that quality has got to be equally as high profile as the functions that we perform.
Thank you, Amber. I haven't missed anybody else, have I? No? Okay. Councillor Goodall? Happy with that. Thank you. Shanaz.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few points on a few comments that have been made about, first of all, the training. I think it's really, really important that training does happen within schools. There's been already some amazing work that's happening with therapeutic services coming in. And I think the advantage of that is that it takes the pressure off the teachers in the school, that there's already a massive amount of pressure on schools to do good teaching and give that support. There's an immense amount of pressure there, so I think to put more pressure on and have that service internal, I think that needs to be considered also. And the benefit of having external partners come in to deliver therapeutic services and support within schools is that they're building external relationships within the community also, and then there's a lot of wraparound support that goes with that in hand in terms of third sector and being able to make those referrals. In terms of the referrals for neurodiversity, speaking from the global majority and parents of global majority, there's a lot of parents who have reported that they don't feel that their children are understood, and those referrals need to be made. So there might be a lack of, I suspect that we're not getting the amount of referrals that we need to and that need to happen. A lot of parents have reported that they've been described as the naughty child or not having the right support when they're not being supported to be regulated. So maybe some training around regulating, and even of the employment, the workforce also, of regulating teachers, of them being regulated themselves. And then something around pastoral care and that being consistent across schools. Some schools have been are highly regarded for their pastoral care in comparison to others. Just going back to the report, so with the inspection recommendation, I'm just really curious to understand which inspection recommendation presents the greatest challenge and who is going to be accountable for delivering that. And then a few questions have already been kind of answered. One was about what improvements will parents and children actually experience. So we've already kind of implemented a lot of, and we've started to working on the recommendation straight away. What are we going to see that's going to change, and have we had anything? And how do we know that the plan is working? You've kind of spoken about this before we get the next inspection report. And then my final concern was around children who do have complex and challenging circumstances. When we're relying on, say for example, the current system is relying on parents and guardians to have the knowledge and confidence on the capacity and not being able to articulate that in their support need. Where are we relying on that, and how do we reduce the inequalities around that? For children who, especially around SGOs. Yeah, thank you. I know there's a lot there. Apologies.
Who would like to take that one on?
Amber will start, and then I'll sweep up, hopefully.
Just in terms of the plan, as I talked about earlier, there's the SEND reform plan and the priority action plan, and then there's other things that have been in the system anyway that we were already working on, will all come together in that plan. The good thing about both of those things, the reform plan and the Ofsted priority action plan, is that there's an element of monitoring through the improvement board, and I think it is a true partnership reflective board. There's all the right people there, and they are the people that can make decisions as well back in their own organisations and areas. So that will have a reporting mechanism on all of the progress for these things. For the priority action plan, we will obviously have external scrutiny as well from Ofsted eventually, but also DFE and HSE will be our external support and challenge to make sure that we stay on track with all of that. We will come up with rigorous plans around any time slippages or things that we've not achieved and what that response is going to be, because we're going to build a system that means that we cannot let go of those actions because they are priorities. And in relation to the question you said about which is the most important, they all are. And that's why we wanted to make sure we reflected everything in the outcome letter rather than just the priority areas, because they're the ones that were flagged up by Ofsted as being the 3 key issues. But we recognise that all of that is about development and none of it is new. So we knew that a lot of that needed to be done anyway. So also with SEND, you'll know that you cannot separate bits out. So if it's a child or young person at the centre of that, they might have an EHCP, they might have needs that need specialist support, they might have staff around them in a school every day that need training, they might have things that they need to get from health. So no child or young person just has one thing and that's the only thing that matters. With SEND and inclusion, it's a global system, so we can't separate it out. So everything's got to run in parallel. And I would also go back to the point that's been made a few times today about the transformation world and the business as usual world. Again, both of those are equally important. So not one takes priority over the other. And that we've got to make sure that we've got enough senior reporting officers who are holding the bag on those particular things. And that's where we'll get the traction, because people will be held accountable. People will be named. We're not naming a role to do a job, we're naming the person. And if that person changes, the new person will be the named person for that. So it will be a lot of reporting back, and there's no hiding. And that's the position we want to be in. Every stone unturned. So everything that we know we need to improve will be part of that programme.
Thank you, Amber. Pete?
Thank you, Chair. So just to pick up a couple of bits of points there. Pastoral care, I agree with you. We see some extremely great examples, and sometimes you wish for a bit more. Obviously, governing bodies and trusts set their structures and their pastoral care, so that's not something that the local authority can direct. We should be setting a tone, though. Completely agree on that. I thought the points you made around equalities were really important. I don't think I've heard that expressed in the time I've been here in that way. So I think we need to make sure we take that away with us when we're looking at our plans, that we do have an equalities lens that we check our thinking through, and I'm sure Anthony's logged that for the board as well. In terms of accountability for delivery, I won't speak for the ICB, but you'll notice it's my name on the report. So accountability for delivery rests with me. Obviously, accountability for policy and resources and performance oversight is a council duty, and obviously the lead member will be fully involved there. And we have seen that commitment at the board, where Councillor Hayden and at times the leader have been present. So I'm confident there is a join up there, but accountability for delivery is with the statutory officers. And you'll see for the ICB, the chief executive of the ICB is named there, but I'm sure, Ian, that's going to be dedicated to you probably more.
Thanks, Pete. Shanaz? No, thank you very much. Councillor Timmins.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few points to go on, if I may. First one, just in terms of schools. It's fair to say that some schools have a fantastic provision in terms of supporting children whilst waiting for the EHCPs. And the children in them schools are getting a good level of support. Interestingly, just going on the last point, quite often those schools have a good pastoral service as well that goes hand in hand with that. But not all schools have that in place, and I think that's where it could be said that some people can be left behind. And just in terms of training, we have spoke a lot about teachers, but as part of that conversation going forward, can we just make sure that teaching assistants form part of that as well? One area that I feel we do struggle with, and my most serious casework, are examples where children have high levels of anxiety, and it's getting those children into school, which in the first place, getting them over the step, which is the difficulty. I would like to see, as part of this plan, a big focus on what we can do better, what training we can give to our professionals to deal with those children that have those anxiety needs. Anthony mentioned earlier that we've got a roadmap which is good and which is clear. I think sometimes when we're setting out what we're going to do to improve the system, even though it is a complex system, we can make these action points too complex and not relatable to those people, parents, who want to know exactly what we're going to do to improve the outcomes for children. So a plea is make sure that when we put our plan in place, it is relatable and that people do have that understanding of it. And next bit's probably for Anthony. So I have spent a bit of time over the last few days, not just studying our report, but looking at reports from other local authorities and the outcomes of their reports. And I've looked at most of them since 2023. What I didn't spot in terms of a pattern was anything in relation to the types of areas they're in or the demographics of those local authorities. One theme that I did spot from the local authorities that were scored the highest rating is a theme of children being an integral part of forming the plan and the plan being built around them, whereas our report wasn't complimentary about the way that we do that. So are there any lessons that can be learnt from how those local authorities put together a good quality plan? One thing that I did spot that was common, so the local authorities that got the highest rating, they have an average population of 218,000, whereas those that received the lowest rating have an average population of 417,000. In Leeds, we have over 800,000 residents. So maybe a question for Anthony, is that a factor? And do larger local authorities like us need to look at the way that we structure this process to make it more manageable in more bite-sized kind of chunks, if you will? Yeah, I think I've covered that.
Thank you, Councillor Timmins. A lot in that, I'm afraid. Anyone like to pick it up? Anthony?
Just on the point about anxiety, you're absolutely right. It's increasing. Emotionally based school avoidance is important. It's really important not to blame children or parents and to promote a sense of belonging at school. So in other words, an acceptance of neurodiversity. It is complex because, as our colleague in relation to school said, there are many people involved in making a child feel at home at school and in making reasonable adjustments. And there was an item on Look North yesterday, not from Leeds, but from a parent who just wanted small, reasonable adjustments at school. So that's one of the hallmarks of a great system. In terms of lessons from other authorities, you could pick out a lot. There are certain correlations, more child inclusion, population size, levels of deprivation. These are all factors that can skew an inspection. But it remains the case that there are several areas with very large populations who have scored really, really well. And the factors that help you to score well are being incredibly well resourced, incredibly well organised, having great leadership and a strong culture where children's services are given long-term strategic and financial priority. But I think it is important, you're absolutely right, to bring those lessons which are relevant to Leeds into this improvement work. Because there are several lessons that you might say are relevant, but they won't be relevant here. But to break the, you've got neighbourhoods, you've got clusters, so whilst you've got a large population, you do cluster the population, so you're doing most of the right things. I'd say here, the main factors are leadership and culture.
Thank you, Anthony. Anybody else?
So just to come back to the here and now, obviously the plans are really important and the structure are really important over to get where Leeds needs to be. And linking to what Councillor Timmins said, I think there've always been lots of undiagnosed neurodiverse children in the system. They weren't on a waiting list, but they will have been there. And I think what's key and key to success, academic as well as happiness of children, is that you teach the child, and your teaching encompasses all the learning styles. And we've got that judgment, which is all academic, you know, that schools are judged on, and that is really unfortunate and hopefully will change. But the reason we have so many pupils who are neat is because the system, not only is the curriculum not right, but we can't change that overnight, but the way in which children are nurtured and able to learn is right. And I think that leaders need to be on board. Leaders in schools need to be on board and trained in that and bring that through their organisation. That will make a massive difference. And luckily, when I was teaching, I was just able to do that. And even when it wasn't always necessarily the done thing, if you get the results, the kids are happy, they're all in school, and that kind of thing works. But I think for the here and now, for those children to get the best they can, given the situation that we're in, I think those leaders need to have that understanding that you need to take on board the learning styles. And I think if all of the way children are taught is kind of based on the early years model, maybe with the exception of phonics, but it's very much gearing to the children and to their learning styles. And I think that's the key to help the children now who otherwise may fail. Oh.
I'm not sure if there was a question in there, Helen. Okay, I think we're going to have to bring this one to a close, Councillor Hayden. I think just sort of finally, we've covered, I think, almost every aspect of the report. Well, every aspect of the report we certainly have. I think that the Council has grasped the nettle, and probably not before time, but it has been grasped. Anthony's covered the aspects from his point of view, from the recovery point of view. We know there are concerns around that. And I'd love to see you again at one of these meetings, Anthony, if it's all possible, later in the year, so we can have your views on how the sort of recovery is progressing. But I'll call a halt at that particular point there and just move on to the recommendation that the Scrutiny Board is asked to note and comment on the content of the area SEND inspection of the Leeds Local Area Partnership, emphasising that it is a local area partnership, it is not just the council. Can someone propose that, please? Okay. Seconded? All in favour? Any against? Abstentions? Okay. Okay, moving on to almost the last item, which is the work programme, which we'll whiz through quickly, I think. It's all at item number 10, and it's really just to ensure that you're happy. This is more for board members, I think, and officers, to ensure that the items we discussed last month have been incorporated or will be incorporated in the work programme over the next sort of 7 or 8 months or so. Are you happy that that's the case? Okay, lovely. Or are you being asked to consider the board's work programme for the 26-27 year? Can someone propose that? Again, Rob? Yes. All in favour? Against? Abstentions? Thank you very much indeed. Just before we move on to the date and time of the next meeting, I would like to pay tribute to one of our ex-members, Karen Renshaw, who left the council this year after many, many years on this particular scrutiny board, and unfortunately passed away very, very quickly after leaving the council. She wasn't ill, as far as we were aware, when she left, and from sort of May until now, I mean, her funeral was last Friday, absolutely dreadful, really was. She contributed a huge amount to this scrutiny board. She was a friend of mine, very, very nice lady, and it's just awful. in the circumstances, and I would just like to have that recorded in the notes, Rob. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, well, the next meeting will take place on Wednesday, the 23rd of September at 1:30, with a pre-meeting for board members at 1:15. And just before we finish, I'd just like to thank everybody. It's been a marathon meeting. I think thoroughly enjoyable, if that's the right word, I would imagine. But I would like to thank officers from the Directorate for coming down, and particularly to our guests, Anthony and Ian. Very kind of you to come down and put so much time in here. It is very much appreciated, and thank you all very much indeed. And last but not least, he's disappeared, but without Rob, none of this could go on. So thank you all, and I'll see you